The sky above Greyson High School bled with the bruised shades of twilight as 5 shadows crossed the cracked parking lot. A breeze carried the smell of dry rot, of dying weeds and mildew trapped in the school's cinderblock husk. For 10 years it had sat silent atop Weaver Hill, windows boarded and chain-link fences sagging in surrender. But tonight, someone had cut the lock. "Jesus," whispered Jonah, shoving his hands in his hoodie. "Why does it still smell like chemicals out here?" You'd think after the fire, everything would have aired out. Beside him, Tara hunched her shoulders against the chill. "Or rotted away completely," she muttered. She still wore black nail polish chewed down to stubs, and under her eyes bloomed purple smudges of insomnia. Grayson had a way of holding on to people long after they left. Janelle lifted her phone flashlight to catch Max's grin in the gloom. Max was always grinning, always the first to say fuck it and break into somewhere abandoned. He lived off adrenaline and liked to mask it as bravery. Janelle knew it was just another addiction. "Can we not do this tonight?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. "We could have gone to River's End like we planned. Bonfire. Music. Normal nostalgia." Max kicked a crumbled brick. "That's the problem, Nell. Normal nostalgia is boring as hell. Grayson's just sitting here, full of memories. We owe it a visit. Like a twisted high school reunion." Behind them, Roman stood silently, arms crossed over his chest. He was taller now than he had been back then, heavy-set with a shaved scalp. He had been the quiet one even before the fire. Even before Mr. Halperin's accident. Jonah turned and glanced at Roman. "You okay, man?" Roman didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed on the chained double doors ahead of them. Something about him made the group uneasy. It wasn't only his silence. It was the way he watched the dark, like he expected it to stare back. "Let's go in," Max said. "Before anyone drives by and calls the sheriff." He hoisted the chain off the handles, revealing the cut. The metal screeched as it fell, echoing down the ruined halls beyond. He shoved the door open, and stale, humid air rushed out. Mold, char, and stagnant time filled their noses. "God damn," Tara gagged. "Smells like the boiler room." Jonah chuckled nervously. "Don't say that. Not here." Their footsteps crunched on broken tiles and shattered safety glass. The darkness swallowed their thin phone flashlights, revealing only fractured glimpses, a trophy case caked in dust, its glass punched out, a paper, Senior Spirit Week, banner hanging half-burned from the ceiling, a defaced portrait of Principal Ingram, eyes gouged out with red spray paint. Each echo seemed to carry a memory. Tara felt her chest tighten, thinking of that last assembly in the auditorium. Of the way Mr. Halperin's hair had been slicked back with sweat, how he screamed before the flames consumed the chemistry lab, how students ran and fell and burned. She shook her head violently. "Not tonight. Just explore. Just prove it's dead." They passed the front office, where half the drywall had been torn away to reveal black mold pulsing like cancer veins. Tara paused, shining her light into the counselor's office. Her own records had been locked away there once, daily notes on severe emotional dysregulation and possible childhood trauma responses. Janelle tugged her arm. "Come on." They moved down the east hall, past shattered lockers slumping off hinges. Every few feet, water dripped from a rusted pipe above. The fluorescents overhead were dark, some still flickering faintly from battery decay, casting epileptic strobe flashes over their pale faces. "Remember Mrs. Wright's class here?" Jonah asked, pointing into a science lab. We dissected fetal pigs in 10th grade. God, that smell. Tara didn't answer. She had frozen in place. In the flicker of Jonah's flashlight, she saw something on the far blackboard. Words scrawled in thick white chalk, fresh despite the years of abandonment. Welcome back, class. Who did that? Tara whispered. Max grinned wider. Probably a squatter. Or one of the meth heads from Route 17. Relax. But Roman stepped forward and ran his broad thumb across the letters. White chalk dust came away clean on his skin. His gaze was unreadable, but his lips moved silently, repeating the words. Roman, Janelle said, reaching for him. Roman, hey, he turned suddenly and walked out of the room, back into the hall, breathing hard. They followed him to the cafeteria entrance, where the steel shutter to the kitchen was half open. Roman stared at it with unblinking intensity. Dude, Jonah said. Don't go in there. But Roman ducked under the shutter and vanished into the shadows. God damn it, Max growled, crawling after him. Tara and Janelle exchanged a glance before following suit. Jonah stayed at the threshold, trembling, torn between loyalty and terror. Inside, the kitchen was a slaughterhouse of mold-blackened ceiling tiles and dangling copper pipes. Every surface was coated in greasy soot from the fire. Pots and trays lay warped and twisted across the floors. At the far end, Roman stood before the walk-in freezer door. His hand was on the handle. Roman, Tara said, her voice breaking. Don't. He turned his head slightly, just enough to show his dead eyes. I have to see, he whispered. He yanked the handle. The freezer door swung open with a sucking noise. A blast of frigid rot hit them, despite the dead power. Their flashlights quivered over frostbitten shelves of decayed hamburger patties and milk cartons. But it was what lay on the floor that stole their breath, a figure. Wrapped in the tattered remains of a cheerleader's uniform. Hair clinging to a rotted scalp. Jaw unhinged wide in a silent scream. Tara stumbled back, hitting the metal counter behind her. Max swore violently, clutching his chest. Janelle fell to her knees, retching bile onto the cracked tiles. Jonah, still at the door, heard their cries and crawled in to see for himself. Oh my God, he gasped. Is that Alyssa? Max turned, his face pale and lips trembling. She disappeared after the fire, he whispered. Everyone said she ran off to Texas. No one ever checked here. Roman knelt before the corpse. He reached out, brushing frost from her exposed teeth. He began to cry silently, shoulders heaving, breath rattling in the echoing dark. Tara felt her sanity fray with every second she spent in that freezer. We need to go, she whispered. We need to go right now. But Roman shook his head, tears dripping onto Alyssa's frozen cheek. No, he said. His voice was so small it barely carried. We can't leave yet. We're not alone here. He's still waiting for us. Who? Max demanded. Who's waiting? Roman looked up at them, eyes glassy with grief and terror. Mr. Halperin. Roman would not move from Alyssa's body. His massive frame blocked the narrow freezer door, casting long shadows across the half-thawed meat and mildewed milk cartons. Max paced behind him, gnawing on the torn cuticle of his thumb until it bled. Roman, Max hissed, we need to get out of here. The smell alone is gonna make us sick. Roman ignored him. His tears had stopped. He sat silent and still, head bent, fingers curling and uncurling around the frostbitten hem of Alyssa's uniform skirt. Tara stepped forward cautiously, fighting the nausea that rippled through her gut every time she glimpsed Alyssa's caved-in chest cavity and the way her teeth were still bared in agony. "Roman," Tara said softly. "Please, come with us." "She's still warm," Roman whispered. Tara recoiled, feeling bile burn her throat. "No, she's not," she managed. "She's—" "Roman, she's not." Roman didn't look at her. "She's still warm," he repeated, almost mechanically. He kept her that way. Jonah backed against the freezer wall, phone flashlight trembling in his grip. Who's he? Mr. Halperin. He's dead, Roman. He died in the fire. Everyone knows that. Janelle let out a choked sob, wiping her nose on her sleeve. "Can we go? Please. This is wrong. Everything about this is wrong." Max clenched his jaw. "Roman. Get up. Now." Roman slowly turned his head, eyes bloodshot, staring straight at Max. His lips twitched with something like amusement. Then he stood, moving aside to reveal Alyssa's corpse in full. A rotting hand was clutched around her wrist. It took Tara a moment to realize what she was seeing. The hand didn't belong to Alyssa. It extended from under her ribs, blackened and mummified, clutching her with skeletal determination. Beneath her body, they could see part of another corpse, burned and fused to the freezer floor, wearing what was once a white lab coat. Max swore violently, stumbling back. "No. No, no, no. That's not possible." Roman's voice was calm now, almost dreamy. "He kept her here. After school. She wouldn't listen to him, so he showed her what happens to students who don't listen." "Mr. Halperin is dead," Jonah whispered desperately. Roman smiled faintly, revealing yellowed teeth. "He's still here." The freezer light flickered once and went out, plunging them into darkness. For a moment, no one moved, trapped in paralyzed silence. Then Max's flashlight flicked back on, illuminating their pale, shaking faces. "Get out," Tara said, her voice cracking with terror. "We need to get out of this room. Now." They filed out of the freezer in a stumbling rush, leaving the dead behind. Jonah was crying openly, his tears smearing the soot on his cheeks. Janelle clung to his hoodie, her nails digging into his side. Max took one last look at Roman, who remained standing in the doorway, staring back at Alyssa's corpse with vacant devotion. "Leave him," Max growled. "We can come back for him with help. He's lost his mind." They fled the cafeteria, sprinting into the hall, their footsteps echoing across broken tiles. They didn't stop until they reached the east wing, breath ragged and hearts pounding. The darkness here felt thicker, like black tar congealing around their ankles. "Where's the exit?" Janelle gasped. "We came from this way, right?" Tara shook her head frantically, scanning the hallway with her flashlight. No, it was by the science labs. This is the freshman wing." Jonah slumped against a row of dented lockers, wiping his eyes. "We're lost," he whispered. "We're lost in our own fucking school." "Shut up," Max snapped. "We're not lost. We just need to think." But the air around them was charged with something unnatural, as if the walls themselves were vibrating with hatred. A distant sound echoed down the hall, a bell ringing, shrill and distorted, though every power line feeding the school had been cut years ago. They froze. It rang again. Clang, clang, clang. "It's the class bell," Tara whispered. "The one they used after lunch." Jonah whimpered softly, sliding to the floor, hugging his knees. Stop. Stop saying these things. Max grabbed his arm, hauling him up. Get a grip. We need to find a way out. They stumbled forward, led only by the thin circles of their flashlights. The hall twisted unexpectedly, ending in a barricade of collapsed ceiling tiles and crumbling insulation. They turned back, but the path behind them was gone, replaced by an unfamiliar set of double doors. Above it, tarnished brass letters read, Room 108, Special Instruction. Tara blinked tears from her eyes. There was no room 108, she whispered. Our rooms only went up to 107. The bell rang again, louder now, vibrating through their bones. Max reached for the handle. Don't, Janelle begged. Don't open it. He looked at her with dead determination. We can't go back. We can only go forward. He pushed the door open. The smell hit them first, scorched hair and coppery blood, mingled with ammonia and burned chemicals. The classroom inside was lined with rusted metal desks bolted to the concrete floor, each one occupied by the mummified corpse of a student. Some were still in uniform. Some had charred, melted flesh clinging to the metal seat backs. At the front of the class stood a skeletal figure in a melted lab coat, its eyeless sockets staring directly at the intruders. The burned flesh of its face was frozen in a permanent grin. In one skeletal hand it clutched a long metal pointer. Take your seats, it rasped. The door slammed shut behind them. The door slammed shut with a bone-jarring boom, echoing through the rows of decayed students. Tara's scream caught in her throat as she stumbled backward into Jonah, who gripped her arms with white-knuckled terror. Janelle whimpered softly, her breath hitching in shallow gasps as she tried to comprehend the scene before them. Max stood frozen in the doorway, eyes locked on the skeletal figure at the front of the room. Its charred lips were twisted into a grotesque semblance of a smile, and its jaw hung slack as if forever screaming or laughing. The pointer in its hand scraped against the warped linoleum as it moved, beckoning them closer. Take your seats, it rasped again, its voice like rusted metal dragged across stone. Jonah began to sob, shaking his head violently. No. No, 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 no. This isn't real. This isn't fucking real. The figure turned its eyeless sockets towards him. Mr. Gardner. Late again. 10 demerits. Jonah's knees buckled, and he fell to the floor, clutching his ears as if trying to block out its words. Max clenched his fists, his jaw twitching as he fought back the urge to vomit. This is bullshit, Max growled. It's a hallucination. The mold, the chemicals, we're seeing shit. It's not real. The skeletal figure tilted its head, the melted flesh of its neck crackling with the motion. Mr. Hunter. Always the skeptic. Please, take your seat. Max took a step forward, his voice trembling with rage and fear. Fuck you. The pointer lashed out faster than anyone could react. It struck Max across the chest with a metallic crack, sending him sprawling into one of the empty desks. He cried out, clutching his ribs where the fabric of his hoodie was split, revealing a long, shallow gash oozing blood. Max! Janelle screamed, running to his side. Take your seats, the figure repeated, its voice deepening with unnatural resonance. The corpses in the desk seemed to shiver at the command, their hollow eye sockets turning towards the group. Tara grabbed Jonah's arm, hauling him up. Get up. We need to sit down. Just do what it says. Jonah was trembling so violently he could barely stand. Together, they moved to the nearest empty desks and slid into the rusted chairs. Max grunted in pain as Janelle helped him up and into a desk at the front, tears streaming down her cheeks as she followed suit. The figure turned its gaze to the blackboard behind it. In long, deliberate strokes, it began to write with a piece of bone chalk pulled from its lab coat pocket. Words appeared in jagged, uneven script: today's lesson, the consequences of ignorance. It turned back to face them, its skeletal grin widening. Class, it crooned, who can tell me the chemical formula for cyanide gas? No one spoke. The silence pressed down like a tomb. Miss Holloway, it rasped, pointing at Tara. Perhaps you remember. Tara shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her face. I don't, please, the figure's grin twitched. Incorrect. 10 demerits. There was a sudden, sharp hiss from the ceiling vents. A faint almond-like scent filled the room. Tara's eyes widened in horror as she realized what it was. Hydrogen cyanide, she whispered, her voice shaking. It's hydrogen cyanide. Correct, the figure said, though no satisfaction warmed its voice. Too late. The corpses around them began to twitch and convulse, their desiccated lungs rasping out dry, rattling gasps. Some collapsed forward onto their desks, jaws hanging open in silent agony. Janelle clamped her hand over her mouth, trying not to scream. Jonah doubled over, dry heaving. We're gonna die, he whispered. We're gonna die in here. Max forced himself to sit upright, wincing with every breath. No. No, listen to me, he rasped. It wants us to believe we're powerless. But we're not. This is a dream. A hallucination. The skeletal teacher turned its eyeless gaze on him again. Mr. Hunter. Always defiant. It raised its pointer, but Max braced himself, gripping the edges of his desk. The pointer came down, cracking across his shoulder with bone-snapping force. He let out a strangled cry but didn't fall this time. Max. Janelle sobbed. The figure stepped closer to him, its scorched flesh crackling and dripping blackened fluids onto the floor. Its smell was overwhelming, burnt fat, ammonia, and ancient decay. Tell me, it hissed, leaning close enough that its teeth brushed his ear. Where were you when Alyssa screamed for help? Max's eyes widened. Tears pooled in his lashes. I didn't know, liar, it whispered. The room flickered, and suddenly Max was no longer in the classroom. He was in the halls again, 10 years ago, the day of the fire. Smoke billowed around him as students screamed and shoved past, trampling each other to get to the exits. Through the chaos, he heard Alyssa's voice, shrill with terror. Max. Please, help me. Please. He turned. She was pinned beneath a collapsed ceiling beam, her cheer uniform scorched and bloody. Flames crept along the walls, smoke filling the hallway with suffocating darkness. Max. Don't leave me. Please. He hesitated, just for a moment. Then he turned and ran. He ran until he reached the exit, until cool night air filled his burning lungs, until her screams were swallowed by the roar of the fire. Max blinked and he was back in room 108. The skeletal figure leaned back, its grin impossibly wide. Detention forever, it rasped. The vents hissed louder, filling the room with the sickly scent of almonds. Tara clutched Jonah's hand, sobbing uncontrollably. Janelle pressed her forehead to the cold metal of her desk, whispering prayers under her breath. Max closed his eyes, tears sliding down his cheeks. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. The corpses around them convulsed violently, jaws snapping open and shut in silent screams. The bell rang again, shrill and deafening. The bell's echo reverberated painfully in their ears, cutting through the choking fumes and wrenching them from their stupor. As suddenly as it had started, the hissing ceased, and the suffocating almond odor faded into a lingering, sickly sweet memory. The skeletal figure stood motionless once more, pointer hanging limply from its blackened fingers. Its jaw hung open again in silent laughter or eternal agony, there was no telling which. Tara opened her eyes slowly, surprised that breath still filled her lungs. Her pulse thundered relentlessly, a cacophony drowning all rational thought. Beside her, Jonah shuddered, half-curled in his seat. His eyes were bloodshot, glistening with trauma and guilt. Max was trembling, clinging to his desk, blood seeping slowly through the torn fabric of his shirt. Janelle sobbed quietly into her hands, her whispers indecipherable prayers slipping between trembling fingers. "We need to leave," Tara whispered. Her voice was hoarse, stripped of everything but the raw urgency of survival. "We need to move now, while it's distracted." Max nodded weakly, forcing himself upright, gritting his teeth against the pain. He staggered from his seat, his hands slick with sweat as he gripped the corner of his desk for support. "Go," he rasped. "Just fucking go." Tara reached out, pulling Jonah to his feet, while Janelle scrambled up from her chair, her movements jerky and frantic. They stumbled towards the door, avoiding the empty gazes of the long-dead students. At the doorway, Max hesitated, glancing back at the creature. It stood utterly still, but its empty eye sockets seemed to follow their every move, searing Max's guilt into him. He pushed through the doorway into the hall, slamming it shut behind him. For a moment they leaned against the peeling paint and rotted wood, gasping for air, shaking violently with lingering dread. "It knew," Max whispered, voice strained. "It knew what happened with Alyssa." Janelle wiped her tears, her expression raw with accusation. "You left her. You left her there, Max." He flinched but didn't deny it. Instead, he stared down at the cracked floor tiles, a haunted look shadowing his eyes. "I panicked. The fire, it was everywhere. I didn't think, I just." Tara looked away, a deep, unspoken fear gnawing at her chest. They all had their secrets from that day, decisions made, actions taken or not taken. Alyssa's screams were just one piece of a nightmarish puzzle. "The exit," Jonah said weakly. "We have to find the exit." But when Tara lifted her flashlight, its pale beam illuminated a vastly different hallway than before. Rusted pipes protruded from shattered drywall, and the tiles beneath their feet sloped sharply downward, the hallway becoming narrower, darker. "This isn't right," she whispered. "We weren't downstairs." Max's breath caught. "The boiler room. He's taking us to the boiler room." "No," Jonah whimpered. "Not again." The school around them seemed alive, breathing and shifting, hurting them deeper into its decaying heart. There was nowhere else to go. Slowly, reluctantly, they moved forward, following the slanting corridor. Moisture slicked the walls, dripping steadily, pooling darkly in shadowed corners. The further they descended, the more oppressive the air became, thick and sulphurous, tinged with something metallic. At the hallway's end loomed a heavy metal door, its surface scorched black from fire and rusted from neglect. A rust-choked sign was barely visible. "Boiler room," staff only. Max's jaw tightened, recalling whispered rumors and hushed warnings from years ago. The boiler room had been Mr. Halperin's sanctuary, a place students avoided, a place of whispered secrets and forbidden terrors. The handle was cold and damp in Max's grip, resisting him momentarily before giving way with a metallic groan. A rush of foul air gusted forth, an acrid mixture of burned chemicals, rotting flesh, and decay so potent that Janelle doubled over, gagging violently. "God, what's down there?" Tara whispered, dread pooling in her stomach. "Answers," Max said bitterly. "Things we never wanted to know." They stepped carefully inside, their footsteps echoing ominously on the rusted metal staircase that spiraled downward. Darkness swallowed their flashlights, offering glimpses of twisted metal pipes, scorched walls, and charred equipment, all warped and melted beyond recognition. The room pulsed with heat, radiating malevolence from a hulking boiler sitting silent and monstrous in the center, its steel belly charred and distended from past flames. As they approached, something crackled beneath their feet. Tara aimed her flashlight downward, illuminating scattered, brittle bones, blackened and cracked by intense heat. Human bones. Jonah choked back bile. What the hell did he do here? A dry, rasping chuckle echoed from the darkness behind the boiler. They froze, every muscle rigid with primal fear. "You've come to join our experiment," a voice wheezed from the shadows. Slowly, painfully, a hunched figure shuffled forward, cloaked in soot-stained remnants of a lab coat. A melted face stared out from beneath singed, wispy hair, skin fused to the skull, lips gone, leaving teeth exposed in a permanent grimace. "Mr. Halperin." "No," Jonah whimpered, backing away. "It's impossible, you died in the fire." Halperin's scorched grin widened grotesquely. "Death," he rasped, "is only the beginning of understanding. Do you understand now, class?" Max lunged forward, snarling with rage and desperation. "Why did you do it? Why Alyssa?" Halperin cocked his head grotesquely. "Sacrifices must be made for progress. She understood eventually. You will, too." The boiler rumbled suddenly, pipes groaning and shuddering as ancient machinery stirred to unnatural life. Steam hissed violently, obscuring their vision, stinging exposed flesh, and sending them staggering back. Tara felt her skin blistering, searing pain ripping through her nerves. "Run!" Max shouted, dragging Janelle away as flames sparked within the boiler's maw. Pipes burst overhead, scalding water cascading down, blistering their skin. Jonah screamed, tumbling to the ground in agony, clutching his burned hands. Through the choking steam, Halperin stood unmoved, his laughter echoing grotesquely. "Understanding through pain," he crowed. "Through agony, we evolve." Max pulled Jonah to his feet, half carrying him back to the stairwell. Tara limped behind, barely conscious, burns radiating agony across her limbs. The staircase was shaking now, collapsing behind them as they scrambled upward. At the top, Max slammed the door shut, sealing the nightmare below. They collapsed, panting and sobbing, burns raw and blistered, the echoes of Halperin's laughter reverberating through the floor. But as they lay gasping, Max felt a sickening realization consume him. Their burns were real. The pain was real. This nightmare wouldn't let them go, not until every secret had been laid bare, every betrayal accounted for. The bell rang again, clear and sharp, an unmistakable summons. They were trapped, damned to remain in Greyson High's eternal lesson. The ringing bell pierced the stagnant silence again, its metallic shriek echoing through the crumbling halls, reverberating deep into their bones. Tara shuddered, pressing blistered palms against her ears, desperate to block the haunting summons. It was no longer just a bell, it was a call from beyond, commanding obedience, demanding surrender. Max sat slumped against the wall, eyes dull with hopeless resignation, his charred shirt clinging painfully to blistered flesh. Jonah lay curled beside him, rocking slightly, moaning through gritted teeth. His hands were raw, blistered skin peeling like wax from burnt fingertips. Janelle knelt nearby, her arms folded tightly around herself as she trembled violently, her whispers fractured prayers dissolving into meaningless murmurs. "We can't stay here," Tara whispered, her voice ragged and weak. "We have to keep moving." "Move where?" Max asked bitterly, staring at the cracked floor tiles. "There is no way out. Every hallway leads to something worse." Tara shook her head, swallowing down tears. "We can't just sit here. The bell, it wants something. It's leading us somewhere." Max laughed harshly, the sound void of any joy, only despair. "It wants to break us. Make us confess everything. Our guilt, our sins." Janelle's sobs grew louder, more desperate. "But why us? Why now? It was years ago." "Because we were here," Max whispered, finally meeting her eyes. "Because we watched him burn. We all had a chance to do something, and we didn't." Jonah stirred, his voice raspy with pain. "We didn't start the fire." Max shook his head grimly. "But we let it burn." Tara forced herself to stand, pain flaring violently across her burnt limbs, agony sharp enough to nearly buckle her knees. She steadied herself against the wall, breathing shallowly through clenched teeth. "The bell isn't going to stop ringing," she said, desperation hardening into resolve. "We have to follow it. See where it wants us to go. It's our only choice." The group exchanged weary, haunted glances, acknowledging the grim truth behind her words. Max groaned, forcing himself upright with a grunt of agony. Jonah struggled to his feet, clutching his wounded hands protectively against his chest. Janelle, tears still streaming silently down her face, took Tara's outstretched arm, finding strength in their shared misery. Together they limped down the warped corridor, flashlights flickering weakly, casting ghostly shadows on the mold-encrusted walls. With each echoing step, the bell grew louder, sharper, driving needles of dread deeper into their minds. The hallway opened suddenly, spilling them into the cavernous auditorium. What had once been a place of rallies and ceremonies was now a gaping tomb. Rows of seats were charred, melted into grotesque shapes, their fabric upholstery hanging in blackened tatters. Above, the ceiling sagged dangerously, fragments dangling like jagged teeth poised to bite. At the center stage, spotlighted by a flickering emergency light, stood an ancient, rusted microphone, its stand bent and twisted from heat. Behind it hung a massive, half-burned banner reading, "Welcome back to Greyson High, class reunion." Tara shuddered violently, her breath hitching in horror. "This is impossible. That banner, it wasn't there before." Max stepped forward slowly, gaze locked onto the stage. "It's a setup. It was waiting for us." The bell rang again, this time from somewhere on stage, jarring their nerves. Max turned toward Tara, grimacing in pain. "We have no choice. It wants an audience." Cautiously, painfully, they ascended the creaking steps onto the stage. The wooden planks moaned beneath their feet, unstable and rotted. Jonah gasped sharply, nearly slipping as his blistered palm brushed the rough surface, leaving a smear of fresh blood. They gathered uncertainly behind the microphone, staring out over the decimated audience of charred seats and invisible spectators. Tara's pulse hammered relentlessly, every instinct screaming at her to flee. From somewhere deep within the auditorium, applause erupted, a dry, hollow clapping that echoed off the scorched walls, reverberating unnaturally. Shadows began to shift in the seats, faceless shapes slowly forming in the gloom. Charred bodies materialized, husks frozen mid-scream or laughter, their burnt limbs clapping stiffly, mockingly. Tara recoiled violently, stumbling into Max, choking back a terrified cry. "Welcome back," rasped a voice from the darkness, distorted yet unmistakably familiar. Mr. Halperin stepped from the shadows onto the stage, moving unnaturally, burnt skin crackling audibly with each step. "Tonight," he continued, voice sickeningly cordial, "we gather again for our annual assembly. A tradition we began the night of our greatest lesson, a night of sacrifice." Max lunged forward angrily. "You trapped us here. What more do you want?" Halperin tilted his head grotesquely, empty eye sockets gleaming wetly. "Confession, Mr. Hunter. Acceptance. Understanding. Admit your role, each of you, in the inferno that claimed your peers. That claimed me." His charred hands rose dramatically. "Assembly is required." The applause intensified, an awful cacophony of bone against bone, burned flesh against burned flesh. Jonah's sobbing deepened, shoulders convulsing violently. I knew about the lab chemicals," he admitted brokenly, voice trembling. "I saw the labels, knew they were dangerous. But I never said anything." Halperin nodded slowly. "Your silence fanned the flames." Janelle whimpered, hands trembling violently. "I skipped class to smoke behind a building that day. I saw Alyssa trapped. I heard her screaming, but I was scared, I ran away." Halperin smiled grotesquely. "Fear spreads fire faster than gasoline." Max swallowed thickly, his voice barely audible. "I left her behind. She begged me. But I abandoned her." The charred crowd erupted again, their applause roaring with macabre approval. Halperin turned slowly to Tara, eyeless gaze penetrating to her very soul. "And you, Tara? What sin binds you to this night?" Tara shook violently, tears spilling freely. I was the one who locked the door to the lab," she whispered, voice fractured with anguish. "I thought it was a prank. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Halperin's twisted grin widened horribly. "But you sealed our fate." The applause rose again, deafening and grotesque. Suddenly, flames ignited along the edges of the stage, consuming the banner and illuminating the rotting wood beneath their feet. The auditorium filled rapidly with choking smoke, a familiar nightmare reborn. Max shouted, shielding his face from rising heat. "We've done what you wanted. We've confessed." Halperin's laugh echoed demonically above the roaring flames. "Confession is merely the first step, students. Now comes atonement. Pain. Sacrifice." The flames surged hungrily, blocking all escape routes, surrounding them in a ring of fire. Tara screamed as the heat blistered her already burned skin, the flames reaching toward them eagerly, hungry to finish the job they had started so many years ago. Class dismissed, Halperin hissed triumphantly, and the flames roared in agreement. The flames surged higher, licking the edges of the stage, belching acrid black smoke that curled into clawed shapes before dissolving into the choking air. Tara coughed violently, her throat raw and burning, tears streaming down soot-streaked cheeks. Jonah collapsed beside her, his blistered hands pressed desperately over his mouth and nose as he wheezed shallow, ragged breaths. Max scanned frantically for an escape, shielding Janelle from falling embers with his own battered body. "There has to be a way out," he shouted, though his voice cracked from smoke and despair. But the flames encircled them entirely now, a seething wall of orange and black that pulsed with malicious hunger. Shadows danced within the inferno, revealing half-formed shapes of burnt students trapped mid-scream, skeletal arms raised in agony. Tara gagged at the sight, bile rising up her throat. "Please," Janelle whimpered, voice strangled with terror. "Please, make it stop, beyond the flames, mister." Halperin watched with eyeless sockets gleaming in the shifting light, his burned lips stretched into a grin so wide it split the remaining flesh of his cheeks. Today's lesson, he rasped, his voice cutting through the roaring fire, is acceptance. Only through embracing pain can you ascend. Only through agony can you truly understand. Max snarled, fury overtaking terror for a moment. Understand what? That you were a psychopath? That you murdered your students for your twisted experiments? Halperin tilted his head grotesquely. Progress demands sacrifice, Mr. Hunter. The world outside remains ignorant of truths hidden within flesh and flame. Tara clutched Jonah's trembling shoulders, her own burns screaming with every movement. We have to move. Crawl beneath the flames, something, anything. Jonah shook his head frantically, tears streaking soot-stained cheeks. It's too late, we're dead already, we're just reliving it over and over, Janelle whimpered, gripping Tara's wrist. No, no, I can't burn again. I can't. Suddenly, the bell rang again. But this time, it was not the shrill metallic clang from before. It was deeper, heavier, vibrating through the floorboards like an earthquake. The flames faltered momentarily, guttering as if caught in an unseen draft. Halperin turned sharply, his burned grin faltering. His charred head twitched unnaturally, scanning the smoky auditorium. No, he rasped, his voice cracking with sudden panic. Not yet. They aren't ready. The floor beneath them shuddered violently, a crack splitting the warped wood from one end of the stage to the other. An icy draft rushed upwards, extinguishing nearby flames and sucking thick smoke down into the widening fissure. Tara clung to Janelle as the ground beneath them buckled and collapsed. They fell. Down, down into cold darkness, tumbling across jagged concrete and twisted rebar. Their screams echoed endlessly as they slammed into the damp, mold-choked earth below. For a moment, everything was silent but their ragged breathing and the distant, muffled roar of the auditorium fire above. Tara forced her eyes open, coughing violently. They were in darkness, but not complete. Dim green emergency lights flickered from cracked fixtures set into stained concrete walls. Pipes snaked across the ceiling, dripping rust-streaked water onto the mold-slicked floor. The air smelled of rot, ammonia, and something coppery. Where are we? Janelle whimpered, curling into herself on the damp ground. Max groaned as he rolled onto his side, clutching his ribs. Maintenance sublevel. I think, beneath the auditorium. Jonah sat trembling, his burned hands clutched tightly to his chest, blood and pus seeping from ruptured blisters. Tears spilled silently down his cheeks. I can't do this. I can't keep going. Tara swallowed back her own sobs, reaching for his shoulder. We don't have a choice. We have to move before he finds us again. Max forced himself upright, his face pale and twisted with pain. He's not invincible down here. He didn't want us to come here. This is somewhere he can't control completely. How do you know that? Janelle asked desperately, her eyes darting to every shadow. Because he panicked, Max rasped, wiping soot from his eyes. He didn't want us to fall through. He wanted to finish the ritual up there. They staggered to their feet, leaning on each other as they limped down the narrow corridor. Fungal blooms sprouted from cracked concrete, their pale caps glowing faintly under flickering green lights. The walls were covered in black mold, oozing down like rotting tar. They passed rusted maintenance carts and broken janitorial supplies, shattered mops floating in rancid puddles. Everything reeked of ammonia and death. As they turned a corner, they came upon a rusted steel door hanging ajar. On its peeling surface was a rotted sign, chemical storage, authorized personnel only. Max hesitated, then pushed the door open with a screech of corroded hinges. Inside, the walls were lined with warped metal shelves stacked with ancient chemical containers, their labels curled and blackened with age. But it was what lay in the center of the room that made Tara gag. A large metal table, its surface scorched and stained dark brown. Leather restraints dangled from the sides, stiff with old blood. Scattered around it were shattered glass beakers, bent scalpels, and melted plastic tubing. Janelle stumbled back, covering her mouth. What is this place? Max swallowed hard. The real experiments. Not just chemistry, he was testing on students. Jonah collapsed to his knees, sobbing into his burned hands. We're never getting out. He's going to cut us apart, make us like them, N.O. Tara shouted, her voice echoing with feral desperation. She grabbed Max's shirt, pulling him close, her eyes wild and shining with tears. We are getting out. We are not going to die here like lab rats. Max stared at her, seeing the ferocity beneath her terror, and nodded grimly. We can use this. Chemicals. Bleach. Ammonia. Acids. If he's physical down here, we can fight back. Janelle shook her head violently. You can't fight a ghost. You can't kill what's already dead. He's not just a ghost, Max rasped. Not down here. Down here he's something else. We saw him panic. He bled. Tara turned, scanning the shelves. Her eyes landed on a thick plastic jug labeled hydrochloric acid. She grabbed it with trembling hands. If he bleeds, he can burn. The bell rang again, this time muffled, distant, but no less chilling. The sound rumbled through the pipes, vibrating the shelves until chemical containers rattled and shifted. He knows where we are, Jonah whispered hoarsely. Good, Tara hissed, clutching the jug tighter. Let him come. From the darkened doorway, the smell of scorched flesh drifted in, heavy and suffocating. Footsteps shuffled closer, slow and deliberate. A guttural rasping voice echoed from the shadows, class is not dismissed yet. The voice slithered into the storage room, each syllable dripping with venomous satisfaction. The fluorescent light overhead flickered violently, illuminating the blackened doorway in strobing flashes. Shadows pulsed and twisted until Mr. Halpern emerged, his burned lab coat dragging along the mold-slicked concrete floor. Charred skin clung in ragged patches to exposed muscle, teeth grinning through melted lips, his eyeless sockets wet and glistening like rotted pits. Did you think you could hide from me down here? He rasped, voice crackling like burning paper. This is my domain. My final classroom. Tara pressed herself against a rusted shelf, clutching the jug of hydrochloric acid to her chest. Max moved in front of her protectively despite his ragged breathing, blood still oozing from burns beneath his shredded hoodie. Janelle cowered behind the toppled cart, her hands clamped tightly over her mouth to muffle her sobs. Jonah remained kneeling, eyes vacant, tears spilling steadily down his blistered cheeks. Halpern stepped forward, his ruined boots splashing in fetid puddles. I see the lesson is still incomplete, he crooned. Understanding comes through pain, students. And today, we finish what began a decade ago. His skeletal hand rose slowly, revealing twisted lengths of melted rebar fused into claw-like fingers. With unnatural speed, he lunged at Max, slashing across his forearm. Max screamed as blood sprayed the stained concrete. The teacher's grin widened impossibly. Max! Tara cried out, lunging forward. Instinct overrode terror as she ripped the cap from the acid jug and swung it with all her strength. The plastic container collided with Halperin's shoulder, sloshing liquid across his charred torso. For a split second, nothing happened, then a sizzling hiss erupted as acid ate through burned flesh and exposed bone. Halperin shrieked, an inhuman screech that rattled metal shelves and shattered a glass flask nearby. Steam rose from his dissolving chest, chunks of melted flesh sloughing off to reveal raw, bubbling muscle beneath. "Run!" Tara screamed. Max grabbed her wrist with his bloodied hand. "No, finish it," he gasped. Halperin staggered backwards, clawing at his liquefying chest, rancid smoke curling around his twitching body. His scream shifted pitch, becoming a guttural roar as he rushed at Tara again. She barely dodged, slipping on slick mold, slamming her back into a shelf. Bottles rattled around her, threatening to tumble. More acid. Max rasped desperately. He grabbed another jug from the shelf beside him, sulfuric acid, lab grade, and with a cry of agony swung it at Halperin's lower body. The plastic cracked open against his hip, flooding his charred legs with corrosive liquid. The air filled with the stench of dissolving tissue, acrid and metallic, so thick it made Tara gag. Halperin shrieked again, this time with something like fear edging the pain. "This is my school," he bellowed, voice warping with fury and anguish. "You can't destroy me here." But his ruined legs buckled under him as the sulfuric acid ate through charred bone, collapsing him to the filthy floor with a wet, meaty smack. He writhed, clawing at the concrete, dragging his corroding body towards Tara. Melted teeth gnashed in her direction. Always, the defiant one. He rasped, half his jaw disintegrating as hydrochloric acid dripped from his chin. "I admired that." Tara backed away until she hit Jonah, who remained kneeling and rocking, lost in silent horror. She turned to him, grabbing his blistered shoulders. "Jonah," she screamed. "Help us. We have to finish him." But Jonah just stared through her with blank, hollow eyes, lips moving soundlessly. He saw nothing but the ghosts dancing in his mind. Janelle crawled forward from behind the cart, tears streaking her soot-stained face, and grabbed another chemical jug. "This is for Alyssa," she whispered, her voice trembling with grief and rage. She hurled it at Halperin's face. The glass shattered, coating him with a sludgy green chemical that began to hiss and bubble on contact. His shriek rose in pitch, echoing down the maintenance corridors like a dying animal. Chunks of melted scalp sloughed away, revealing the glistening curvature of scorched skull beneath. The fluorescent light flickered again, pulsing with sickly green illumination. Shadows seemed to recoil from Halperin's dissolving form. The pipes overhead rattled violently as if the entire school was convulsing with rage or agony. "You think this ends me?" he howled, his voice warping into a chorus of layered shrieks and guttural groans. "I am Greyson. I am every sin you left behind." He lunged again, dragging himself forward on skeletal elbows, acid pooling beneath his corroding ribs. Max stumbled back, adrenaline overriding pain as he grabbed a rusted metal pole from the toppled cart. "Burn in hell," he snarled, raising the pole high. With all his remaining strength, he drove the jagged end into Halperin's exposed skull. It punched through scorched bone with a sickening crack, sending up a spray of blackened blood and acidic sludge. Halperin convulsed violently, his clawed hands scrabbling against the concrete before falling still. For a moment, the storage room fell silent, save for their ragged, choking breaths. The fluorescent light flickered and steadied, casting its sickly glow over Halperin's ruined corpse. Acid continued to bubble across his torso, dissolving his melted lab coat and revealing the skeletal remains beneath. Tara slumped to her knees, clutching her burned arms to her chest as tears streamed freely down her face. Janelle sobbed quietly beside her, staring at the corpse in horror and relief. Max leaned against the shelf, shaking violently, blood dripping from his gashed forearm onto the mold-slicked floor. Jonah continued to rock silently, his eyes unfocused, whispering to ghosts no one else could see. But before they could even catch their breath, a deep, resonant boom echoed through the sublevel. The shelves rattled. Rust flakes rained down from the pipes overhead. The temperature dropped abruptly, their ragged exhales fogging in the sudden chill. The corpse on the floor began to tremble. Steam rose from its dissolving remains as bones twisted and snapped unnaturally. An inhuman groan rumbled from deep within the skeleton, vibrating through the floor and into their marrow. "No," Tara whispered hoarsely. "No, it's not over, it's never over." The bell rang again. Deeper than before, impossibly loud, shaking the entire underground. The rusted door slammed shut behind them with a deafening metallic clang. A voice rose from the dissolving corpse, no longer Halperin's but something older, deeper, inhuman. "Class is not dismissed." The echo of the bell reverberated through the maintenance tunnels like a death knell, vibrating the mold-slicked concrete beneath their feet. Tara pressed trembling hands to her ears, but the ringing pierced her skull, deeper than sound, thrumming into her bones. Max slumped against a rusted shelf, clutching his gashed forearm, blood dripping steadily onto the floor. Janelle knelt beside him, shaking uncontrollably, her tears streaking ash and soot down her gaunt face. Jonah remained on his knees, rocking gently, staring blankly at the dissolving remains of Mr. Halperin as if seeing through them into some hidden abyss. Smoke curled from the skeletal corpse, rising in ghostly tendrils. The disintegrating flesh bubbled and hissed, revealing scorched bone now cracking and splitting open. A deep, guttural rumble rose from within it, vibrating the chemical containers on every shelf. The fluorescent light above flickered madly, casting seizure-like strobes across the storage room. Then, the corpse spoke. Not with Halperin's voice, but something older, deeper, layered with inhuman echoes. "This vessel was weak. But knowledge is eternal." The skeletal jaws snapped open wider than anatomically possible. A thick, black smoke erupted from its gaping maw, spreading rapidly across the floor like an intelligent mist, curling around Max's ankles, slithering up Jonah's trembling arms. It was cold, impossibly cold, burning their flesh with numbing frost wherever it touched. Tara screamed as the smoke wrapped around her throat, squeezing until her vision darkened at the edges. Her knees buckled, her flashlight clattering to the slick concrete, illuminating the chemical room from a low angle. In that trembling light, she saw the smoke flow towards the door, then slip through its rusted cracks. And as the last tendril left the room, the door swung open with an ancient metallic groan. Silence fell, heavy and oppressive, broken only by their ragged gasps. The bell was silent now, but its echo remained deep within their minds, vibrating in time with their frantic pulses. "We have to move," Tara croaked, rubbing her raw neck, feeling blood well beneath her blistered skin. "It's going somewhere, we can't let it, we can't." Max wiped sweat and soot from his eyes, forcing himself upright with a strangled groan. "Where is it going?" Janelle sniffled, rubbing her swollen eyes. "Up. Back up. Back to the school." Tara swallowed hard, dread tightening her chest until her breaths came in shallow, ragged pulls. "The principal's office," she whispered. "That's where it ends." Jonah's vacant gaze flickered, as though registering her words. "No, not ends." He rasped hoarsely. "That's where it begins." They helped him to his feet, ignoring his feverish trembling. Together they stumbled out into the corridor, following the trail of residual smoke. The maintenance tunnels twisted and turned like rotting intestines, their cracked pipes dripping rust-tainted water onto their scorched skin as they passed. Fungal blooms pulsed faintly along the walls, illuminating the path with their sickly bioluminescence. Finally, they emerged into the darkened east wing. The fire damage here was worse than they remembered. The ceiling sagged dangerously, blackened beams splintered and jutting down like skeletal ribs. Every step crunched broken glass and charred plaster beneath their shoes. They moved silently down the hall, past rooms they once knew. The counselor's office with its mold-choked carpet. The biology lab, now filled with mummified fetal pigs in shattered jars. The janitor's closet, its door hanging open to reveal nothing but darkness crawling with skittering insects. The bell rang again. Its sound was different now. Deeper. Slower. Like a toll from the depths of an ancient cathedral, vibrating the entire school, rattling debris from the ceiling tiles to fall like snow. At the end of the hall loomed the double doors of the principal's office. The frosted glass windows were cracked and blackened with soot, the nameplate melted and illegible. From beneath the warped door seeped wisps of black smoke, swirling and pulsing as though breathing. Tara reached for the handle with a trembling, blistered hand. "Wait," Max rasped, grabbing her wrist. His eyes were bloodshot, brimming with grief and terror. "We don't have to go in there. Whatever's behind that door, it's not something we can fight." She met his gaze, tears streaking through ash on her cheeks. "It's not about fighting anymore, Max. It's about finishing this. Or none of us ever leave." Janelle whimpered behind them, clutching Jonah's burned arm as he rocked silently. Max swallowed hard, released her wrist, and nodded. Tara pushed the door open. Inside, the office was choked with shadows and cloying smoke. The ceiling fan spun lazily, even though the power had been cut for years. Papers and burnt folders were strewn across the carpet, each page covered in warped, illegible writing. Behind the melted oak desk sat Principal Ingram. Or what was left of him. His skeletal remains were fused to the chair, scorched and blackened, the melted fabric of his suit permanently adhered to his charred ribcage. But it was his face, or rather, what was attached to it, that stole Tara's breath. Thick tendrils of black smoke slithered from his gaping jaw, writhing into the air like parasitic worms. As they watched in silent horror, the smoke coalesced above the desk into a towering, shifting shape. It formed a vaguely human silhouette, impossibly tall, with elongated arms that brushed the ceiling and a head crowned with branching horns made of living shadow. The creature's voice was layered with countless others, male and female, adult and child, teacher and student. A chorus of agony and revelation. "Welcome, back, students," Jonah collapsed to the floor, convulsing violently as foam bubbled from his lips. Janelle screamed, backing away until her shoulders hit the scorched filing cabinets, her eyes rolling back with terror. Max stood frozen, fists clenched, his burns weeping blood down his trembling arms. Tara fell to her knees, sobbing openly as the creature's shadow enveloped her. "What do you want from us?" she cried, her voice cracking under the weight of her terror. "What is this? Why us?" The creature leaned down, its shifting face inches from hers, its countless voices whispering as one. "Because you never left. Your sins bound you here. Your guilt feeds us. Your knowledge completes us. And now, your final lesson begins." The bell rang again, impossibly loud, shattering the remaining glass in the office windows. The ceiling above them split, raining soot and broken tiles as the world dissolved into darkness and deafening noise. And somewhere deep within that darkness, Tara felt something latch onto her soul, sinking in hooks that could never be removed. Darkness swallowed everything. The tolling bell vibrated through Tara's skull, each peal drilling deeper into her consciousness until thought itself became pain. Her body felt weightless, drifting in a cold void where there was no floor, no ceiling, no walls, only black eternity and the deafening chorus of screams that echoed within it. Gradually, shapes began to form in the darkness. Shadowy figures materialized, flickering like dying fluorescent lights. Rows of students sat in decayed desks stretching infinitely in all directions, their charred bodies twisted into grotesque shapes. Some had melted flesh fused to metal chair backs, others sat with gaping jaws frozen mid-scream, their empty eye sockets staring blindly ahead. Tara floated among them, unable to move, her burned limbs dangling uselessly at her sides. She could see Jonah a few desks away, slumped forward, blood dripping steadily from his nose and mouth onto a mold-stained desk. His eyes were vacant, lips twitching silently with words trapped beyond sanity. Max was further down the endless row, his head tilted back, teeth bared in a snarl of agony, one blistered arm twitching spasmodically against the rusted desk frame. Janelle sat nearest to Tara, her wrists bound to the armrests with melted plastic restraints, tears mixing with pus and blood as they streamed down her blistered cheeks. And at the front of this nightmare classroom stood the creature. Its towering form rippled with shifting shadow, a multitude of writhing smoke tendrils slithering from its chest and back. Its elongated arms dragged along the cracked floor, skeletal hands ending in claws formed from black fog. Its face was a mask of shifting shadows, countless screaming mouths opening and closing across its surface, speaking in layered whispers. "Welcome, to detention," it intoned, its voices overlapping in an endless chorus. "Your final lesson begins." The bell tolled again, each ring causing the decayed students to shudder violently in their seats. Some twisted unnaturally, vertebrae cracking loudly. Others slammed their melted heads onto their desks over and over, driven by an unseen compulsion. Tara screamed, but no sound emerged from her burned throat. The creature glided forward, its smoky limbs trailing behind it like funeral veils. It stopped before her, leaning down until its shifting, multi-mouthed face hovered inches from hers. "Why do you fight, Tara?" it asked, hundreds of voices vibrating through her chest cavity. "You were always a good student. Always observant. Always listening." Tara sobbed silently, tears burning across her blistered cheeks. Thoughts flickered through her pain-clouded mind, memories of walking these halls with Alyssa, gossiping about cheer tryouts, laughing about secret crushes. Memories of Mr. Halperin's chemistry class, of his too long stares and unsettling praise. Memories of the day of the fire. "You locked the lab door," the creature whispered. "You sealed his fate. You sealed their fates. You sealed yours." Images flashed before her eyes with suffocating clarity, the lock twisting under her trembling fingers. Her laughter as she ran away, thinking it was just another prank. The screams that followed. The explosion. The smoke. The smell of burned hair and charred skin. "Your guilt feeds us, Tara," it crooned, dozens of melted mouths curling into mocking grins. "Without guilt, there is no lesson. Without pain, there is no growth." It extended one smoky claw, brushing her burned cheek. Tara convulsed violently, agony rippling across her nerve endings like an electric current. Suddenly, the classroom flickered, and they were back in the East Wing hallway. The bell rang overhead, rusted lockers vibrating with its deafening toll. Students screamed and ran, their hair and clothes burning, skin sloughing off in blackened sheets. Flames crawled up the walls like ravenous serpents, devouring everything in their path. Tara saw herself, younger, laughing as she sprinted down the hall. Saw herself pause before the chemistry lab door, saw her hand reach out and twist the lock. "Do it again," the creature whispered, its voices overlapping like a demonic choir. "Relive it. Feed us." She watched helplessly as her younger self turned and ran away, leaving the locked door behind. Screams erupted from inside the lab as flames burst through the glass. Alyssa's voice rose above the chaos, shrill with agony. "Tara! Help me! Please!" The scene flickered, and she was back in the infinite classroom, sobbing silently in her seat. The creature loomed over her, its shadow blotting out the flickering lights overhead. "You will remain here," it intoned. "Forever reliving your sins. Forever nourishing our hunger." Across the room, Jonah began to convulse violently. Foam spilled from his lips, his eyes rolling back into his skull as he thrashed against his melted restraints. The creature drifted towards him, its clawed shadows caressing his shivering form. "Jonah," it whispered, "tell us your secret." Jonah screamed, his voice raw and inhuman. "I switched the labels. I switched them. I thought it would be funny, I didn't know it would explode, I didn't know." The creature's mouths twisted into delighted grins as the bell tolled again, louder this time, rattling their teeth in their skulls. Max roared in defiance, straining against his restraints, muscles trembling violently. "Enough," he bellowed, his voice cracking with grief and rage. "End this." The creature turned its faceless gaze towards him, shadows curling from its chest like tendrils of living tar. "It ends," it rasped, "when class is dismissed." It drifted forward, enveloping Max's trembling body in smoky darkness. He screamed as the shadows poured into his mouth, his eyes, his ears, filling him with writhing blackness. His back arched violently, blood spraying from his nose as his burn split open, revealing raw, weeping flesh beneath. Tara tried to scream but no sound emerged. She could only watch as the creature burrowed into Max's body, its voices echoing in triumphant chorus, "Detention never ends." The bell tolled again. And again. And again. The lights flickered faster until the room dissolved into a strobing nightmare of shadows and screams. Tara felt her mind tearing apart, unraveling thread by thread until only darkness remained. The bell tolled endlessly, its vibrations echoing beyond sound, rumbling through bone and memory. Darkness pulsed in rhythm with each toll, flickering images of burned hallways and screaming students across Tara's mind. Her body no longer felt real, just a trembling vessel suspended in a void of agony and guilt. Gradually, the tolling slowed. The shadows receded, revealing a new space around them. They were no longer in the endless classroom or the scorched halls. They stood in the old gymnasium. But it wasn't how Tara remembered it. The basketball hoops were twisted, their backboards shattered. Bleachers were melted into slumped heaps of metal and blackened plastic. The wooden floorboards were warped and scorched, gaping cracks revealing oozing black tar beneath. Above the stage where banners once hung, a massive chalkboard dominated the wall. Scrawled in jagged, childlike handwriting were the words. "Final exam, pass or perish." Tara blinked through tears, her burned eyelids cracking painfully. Janelle stood beside her, trembling violently, clutching her charred arms to her chest. Jonah knelt on the warped floor, rocking back and forth, whispering unintelligible prayers. Max stood a few feet away, but his posture was wrong. Too rigid. His burned skin rippled subtly, as if something crawled beneath it. "Max," Tara rasped, her voice raw and shredded. "Max, are you okay?" Slowly, he turned to face her. His eyes were black voids, swirling with smoke. His mouth split into a twisted grin, teeth blackened and cracked. "Max is gone," he said, but the voice was not his. It was layered, echoing with dozens of tones, male, female, child, adult, all speaking in unison. "He has been dismissed." Tara stumbled back, bile rising in her throat as the thing wearing Max's body stepped forward. Its charred skin bubbled and split, revealing writhing black tendrils beneath. Janelle let out a strangled sob, collapsing to her knees. "Please," she whispered hoarsely. "Please just let us go." The creature tilted its head grotesquely, shadows coiling around its crown like a twisted halo. "Class is not dismissed until the exam is complete." The chalkboard behind it flickered, new words appearing in smudged white letters. Question 1. What is the true nature of knowledge? Tara shook her head violently, tears streaming down her blistered face. "What is this? What do you want from us?" The creature's grin widened impossibly, splitting its burned cheeks. "Answer or perish." Jonah whimpered from where he knelt, rocking faster. "Knowledge is understanding," he whispered. The creature turned towards him, shadows tightening like a noose around its smoke-crowned head. "Incorrect." Jonah screamed as black tendrils burst from the cracks in the floor, wrapping around his arms and legs, lifting him into the air. His body convulsed violently, skin splitting open along blistered seams as the shadows burrowed into him. Blood rained onto the warped gym floorboards as he screamed and screamed until his throat tore and his eyes burst from their sockets. Tara sobbed, pressing her burned hands to her ears as Janelle shrieked beside her. The creature dropped Jonah's twitching corpse to the floor with a wet, cracking thud. His empty eye sockets stared blankly up at the flickering gym lights. The chalkboard flickered again. Question 2. Why does pain exist? The creature turned its smoking gaze to Janelle. Answer. She shook her head violently, tears spraying ash from her cheeks. "I don't know," she sobbed. "Please, I don't know, answer." She screamed, clutching her head as blood streamed from her nose. Because it teaches us," she choked out desperately. "Pain teaches us what matters." For a moment, silence. Then, partial credit. The shadows slithered towards her but paused, retreating slightly. Janelle collapsed forward, sobbing into the burned wood floor. Tara trembled as the creature turned to her. Its black void eyes pulsed with malevolent intelligence. Question 3. Why are you here? She sobbed, shaking her head, blistered lips trembling. Because I locked the door, because I killed them." The creature tilted Max's ruined head slowly. "Is that your final answer?" She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing herself to breathe through the pain and terror. Memories flickered behind her eyelids, the burned halls, Alyssa's screams, Mr. Halperin's twisted grin. The fire. The guilt. But beneath it all was something else. Something deeper. Older. A memory she never knew she had. In her mind's eye, she saw Greyson High before it was built, a rotting farmhouse atop a muddy hill, its foundations sunk deep into black, oozing soil. She saw men in dark robes chanting around a massive pit, feeding bodies into it. She saw something in that pit, something that moved with impossible grace and grotesque beauty, made of shadows and writhing smoke. It opened countless eyes and smiled with countless mouths. The creature's voice pulled her back. "Why are you here?" Her eyes snapped open. Tears streamed freely as she whispered, "Because you needed us. You needed believers. You needed witnesses." The creature froze. Its shadow tendrils quivered in the smoky air. "Explain." Tara's voice cracked, but she kept speaking, her words tumbling out in trembling realization. You feed on pain and guilt. On knowledge. On secrets. Greyson was built to worship you. The experiments, the deaths, they were sacrifices. But you need someone to remember. Someone to carry the guilt forward. That's why you won't let us go. The shadows recoiled slightly, writhing faster around the creature's smoky body. Its myriad voices whispered urgently to each other, creating an overlapping cacophony of inhuman words. The chalkboard flickered violently. New words burned across it: extra credit, dismiss your classmates. The creature reached towards Janelle with one long, smoking claw. Prove your understanding, Tara. Kill her. Graduate. Tara screamed, throwing herself between Janelle and the creature. No, she sobbed, clutching Janelle to her blistered chest. Take me instead. Please, take me. The creature paused, its shadowy claw hovering inches from her burned skin. Its countless mouths opened simultaneously, releasing a shriek so piercing that Tara's vision dissolved into white agony. She clung to Janelle as darkness enveloped her senses, the creature's whisper vibrating through her bones. Final exam, incomplete, the bell tolled again, so loud it shattered the gym lights overhead. Shards rained down around them like glittering razors as darkness swallowed everything. Darkness swallowed everything after the bell's final deafening toll. For a timeless moment, there was no floor beneath Tara, no burned air to breathe, no pain, no sound, only a cold void clutching her mind like skeletal hands. Slowly, the world reformed around her, built from flickering shadows and vibrating echoes of unseen whispers. She blinked and found herself alone in a long, narrow hallway lined with hundreds of identical rusted lockers. Each locker door was warped by heat, blistered paint curling away like dead skin. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, illuminating the hall in rhythmic pulses, each strobe revealing the warped, burned landscape of her old high school. But Tara was not the only living thing here. At the end of the hallway, the creature waited. It no longer wore Max's body. Instead, it loomed impossibly tall, its smoky torso stretched and contorted into a shape that defied human anatomy. Countless tendrils of black smoke slithered from its shoulders and chest, each tipped with tiny screaming mouths that whispered in tortured unison. Its elongated arms brushed the scorched linoleum floor, clawed hands dripping thick, viscous shadow that sizzled and ate through tile upon contact. Its face was a swirling vortex of shifting shadows, eyes and mouths and horned silhouettes flickering across its surface like a living nightmare. Tara's knees buckled. She pressed burned palms to the filthy floor to steady herself, fighting the wave of nausea that rose at the sight of it. Welcome to remedial lessons, Tara, it rasped, its voice layered with hundreds of others, male and female, young and old, their agony vibrating deep in her bones. You failed your final exam. But there is still hope for your education. She sobbed, shaking her head weakly, blistered skin cracking and bleeding across her neck. Please, let me go. I'll do anything, please. The creature drifted forward, each movement silent but vibrating the air with psychic pressure. Its swirling mouths grinned grotesquely. Anything. She swallowed bile and nodded, tears streaming down soot-streaked cheeks. Then learn. The lockers lining the hallway rattled violently. One by one, their warped doors burst open, revealing charred corpses stuffed inside, students she once knew. Alyssa. Mr. Halperin. Max Jonah. Even Janelle, her eyes burned out, her mouth still frozen in a silent scream. The corpses tumbled onto the floor, twitching with residual nerve spasms, their melted limbs twisted into unnatural shapes. Tara screamed, pressing herself against the mold-choked wall, gagging as burned hands twitched towards her. The creature drifted closer until its smoky tendrils brushed her face, leaving streaks of black slime that burned coldly into her blisters. Lesson 1, it whispered. Knowledge is sacrifice. It extended one massive claw and plunged it into Alyssa's corpse. The burned body convulsed, eyes snapping open, mouth stretching wide in a scream of silent agony. The creature tore something from her chest, a glistening mass of rotting flesh shot through with black veins, pulsing wetly in its grasp. Tara gagged, turning away, but the creature forced her gaze back with a smoky tendril wrapping around her jaw. Eat. She sobbed, shaking her head violently. No, no. Please, eat. It shoved the rotting mass against her lips. The smell was suffocating, burned hair, acid, and rotten meat. Her stomach clenched violently, but the creature forced the mass into her mouth. She screamed, choking as bile surged up her throat, but the creature's tendrils held her jaw shut until she swallowed. Pain tore through her stomach like fire. Her vision blurred as darkness edged in, but the creature's voice anchored her in this living nightmare. Lesson 2. Pain is knowledge. It dragged her forward through the burned hallway. The world flickered around them, shifting into the chemistry lab. The room was exactly as it was before the fire, beakers lined neatly on counters, faint smell of ammonia and formaldehyde drifting in the air. Mr. Halperin stood at the front, smiling as he adjusted his thick glasses, sweat beading on his forehead. "Miss Holloway," he said, voice calm and warm, "would you please come forward for today's demonstration?" Tara's body moved without her will, stepping to the front of the class. The other students watched silently, their faces blurred and shifting like melting wax. Halperin turned towards her, revealing a thick glass beaker filled with clear liquid. "This is concentrated hydrofluoric acid," he explained, swirling it gently. "Highly corrosive. Dissolves organic tissue and bone. Now, Miss Holloway, place your hand in the beaker." Tara screamed, trying to pull away, but her arm moved forward anyway, guided by invisible forces. Her burned fingers hovered over the liquid, trembling violently. Lesson 2, the creature whispered in her ear, though Halperin did not react. Pain is knowledge. Her hand plunged into the acid. Instantly, pain unlike anything she had ever known exploded through her nerves. Her flesh bubbled and sloughed off into the liquid, exposing pink tendons that dissolved into floating strands. Her scream tore her throat raw as black dots swam across her vision. The pain climbed up her arm like lightning, crackling through every nerve until her mind splintered with it. But the creature's voice anchored her once more. Lesson 3. Sacrifice is survival. The world flickered again. The chemistry lab dissolved into darkness. Tara collapsed onto something cold and hard, tile floor, cracked and sticky with congealed blood. Dim emergency lights flickered overhead. She forced her swollen eyes open. She was back in the East Wing Hall. Rows of lockers lined the corridor, each vibrating with muffled screams from within. The creature loomed above her, its smoky form stretching from ceiling to floor, countless shadowy mouths open in silent laughter. "Your classmates are waiting, Tara." It gestured with a massive claw to the lockers. The nearest locker door burst open. Janelle was inside, her burned arms bound to rusted metal bars. Her eyes were swollen shut, her mouth hanging open in silent agony. "Sacrifice her," the creature crooned. "Feed us. Survive." Tara sobbed, crawling backwards across broken tiles slick with mold and blood. "No, no. I won't," the creature's smoky claw shot out, wrapping around her throat, lifting her effortlessly off the floor. Her burned legs kicked weakly as her vision blurred. Lesson 3. Sacrifice is survival. It hurled her forward. Her body slammed into the open locker with bone-cracking force, colliding with Janelle's limp body. Blood sprayed across her blistered face as Janelle's head cracked against rusted metal. Tara screamed as the creature's shadows wrapped around them both. The bell tolled again. And again. And again. Each toll tore reality apart, dissolving the hallway into flickering darkness and boiling shadow. The last thing Tara saw was Janelle's burned, sightless eyes staring into hers, lips trembling with silent terror. Then everything was darkness, and the creature's voice whispered from everywhere and nowhere, "Detention never ends, Tara. Remedial lessons will continue forever." Darkness pulsed like a diseased heartbeat around her. Tara drifted in that void, weightless, her burned limbs numb and unfeeling. The tolling bell vibrated through the darkness with each peal, rattling her fractured mind and stitching her terror into its echo. Gradually, the shadows thinned, revealing flickering candlelight. Her back pressed against cold stone. The smell of mildew, rotting wood, and blood choked her nostrils. She blinked slowly, tears and soot crusting her lashes, forcing her eyes to focus. She was underground. The walls were rough stone, wet with seeping groundwater. Rotted wooden support beams framed the narrow chamber, and overhead, rusted pipes dripped a slow, steady rhythm onto the moss-slicked floor. Dozens of candles lined every surface, their greasy orange flames illuminating symbols etched into the stone in dried, flaking blood. Sigils of eyes within eyes, mouths within mouths, swirling labyrinthine glyphs that made her vision swim if she stared too long. Her wrists were bound with thick, mold-blackened rope tied to rusted iron rings driven into the stone behind her. Her burned arms screamed with pain at the slightest twitch. The air was damp and frigid, biting into her blistered skin until her teeth chattered violently. In front of her loomed the creature. It no longer wore a shifting shape. Now, it had solidified into something impossibly tall and thin. Its skin was black like burned bone, stretched tightly across elongated limbs ending in clawed fingers. Its chest split open vertically, revealing a churning mass of glistening shadows that writhed and whispered in countless layered voices. Its head was crowned with branching horns of black bone, each tipped with flickering shadow flame. Where its face should have been was only a gaping void filled with hundreds of tiny, lidless eyes, each swirling with shadows of screaming faces. It stood silent, watching her with that multitude of eyes until her sanity quivered under its attention. Finally, it spoke. "Welcome to your final lesson plan, Tara." She sobbed, shaking her head weakly as tears mingled with the blood oozing from cracked burns on her cheeks. "Please, please just kill me, please." Its voices vibrated the stone chamber with every syllable. Death is knowledge denied. Pain is knowledge achieved. Survival is knowledge complete. The stone floor before her rippled like oil, shadows seeping upward to form a swirling mirror. Within its depths, she saw herself, bound and broken, skin burned away in places to reveal pulsing red muscle and glistening bone. Behind her image, dozens of burned bodies lay in endless rows. Students, teachers, janitors, counselors, their flesh blackened and twisted, their jaws hanging open in silent screams. Lesson 1, the creature intoned, raising one clawed finger. Understand the origin of your education. The mirror rippled again, revealing Greyson Hill before the school existed. A rotting farmhouse squatted atop the overgrown slope, its walls sagging, windows boarded with planks charred from ancient fire. Hooded figures moved in procession around it, chanting in languages older than civilization. They carried torches that burned with violet flames and dragged emaciated bodies bound in rope towards a yawning pit dug behind the house. Tara saw the pit writhe with shadows, felt an ancient intelligence slither up from its depths, coiling around her mind in the vision. Hundreds of flickering eyes opened within the pit, each glowing with cold violet light. The chanting rose in volume until it reverberated through her ribs like thunder. One by one, the bodies were cast into the pit, their screams cut short as shadows swallowed them. Greyson High was built upon sacrifice, the creature whispered in her ear, though its form did not move. This hill was consecrated long before brick and mortar. We were here before your cities. Before your language. We taught your ancestors the first lesson of pain. The vision rippled and shifted. Greyson High rose from the pit, bricks crawling upwards like insect colonies forming a nest. Windows opened like blinking eyes. The front doors gaped like a yawning maw. She saw Mr. Halperin, younger, kneeling before the foundation in the dead of night, whispering prayers written in blood onto burned parchment. She saw him burying jars of chemical-soaked organs beneath the chemistry lab floor, drawing sigils in acid across the walls, seeding the halls with death. She saw students screaming in locked classrooms while Halperin chanted with a smile, his burned lips splitting as shadows consumed his eyes. Lesson 2, the creature crooned, raising a second clawed finger. Knowledge is sacrifice. The mirror rippled again, showing Tara her own memory, locking the chemistry lab door. Alyssa's screams. Smoke curling beneath the door as flames devoured her classmates. Her own laughter echoing down the hall as she ran. No. Tara screamed, thrashing against her bonds until blood flowed freely down her blistered arms. I didn't know. I didn't know it would happen. Ignorance is not innocence, the creature whispered, its eyes pulsing with cold violet light. The mirror shifted once more. Now she saw Max, Jonah, and Janelle. Each stood before the creature, bound as she was, their burned bodies trembling violently as the shadows enveloped them one by one, forcing them to relive their sins endlessly in silent, screaming loops. Finally, the mirror turned back to her reflection. Lesson 3, it hissed, raising a third clawed finger. Sacrifice is survival. The ropes binding her wrists fell away, dropping her limp arms to her lap. The creature extended one clawed hand towards her, revealing a small, rusted scalpel resting on its palm. Its countless eyes stared into her soul. One must die for another to live. Choose your sacrifice. Or remain here forever, student. Tara sobbed, staring at the scalpel with blurred vision. Her burned fingers trembled as she reached forward and grasped its cold metal handle. The creature stepped aside, revealing Janelle kneeling on the stone floor, her eyes swollen shut, her burned arms bound behind her back. Choose. Tara screamed, curling into herself, pressing the scalpel against her forehead until blood trickled down. Please, please don't make me do this, please. The creature loomed above her, shadows coiling from its chest like smoke from a funeral pyre. Lesson plan incomplete. Detention never ends. The bell tolled again, louder than ever before, shaking the chamber until stone dust rained from the ceiling. The candles flickered violently, illuminating the sigils on the walls as they seemed to slither and crawl in the flickering light. Tara clutched the scalpel to her chest, her sanity unraveling thread by thread under the bell's toll. She knew there would be no graduation. Only eternal remedial lessons in this hell beneath Greyson High. The bell's toll still vibrated through Tara's skull, each peal shredding the last fragile threads of her sanity. She curled on the damp stone floor, clutching the rusted scalpel against her blistered chest. Shadows pulsed around her in rhythm with the tolling, breathing with malignant life. The creature loomed above her, a towering mass of blackened bone, writhing smoke, and countless eyes that glowed cold violet. Its chest cavity remained split open, revealing the churning mass of whispering shadows within, each flickering with screaming faces frozen in agony. "Rise, Terra," it crooned, its layered voices vibrating the stone walls. "You have a final lesson to complete." Terra trembled violently, her burned fingers clenching the scalpel so tightly that blood seeped from beneath her cracked fingernails. Tears mingled with soot and blood as they dripped onto the scalpel's rusted blade. She forced her swollen eyes open, vision blurred and wavering. Before her knelt Janelle, bound with mold-blackened ropes tied to rusted iron rings driven into the stone floor. Her charred arms were twisted painfully behind her back, and her swollen eyelids fluttered weakly with each labored breath. Terra," Janelle croaked, her voice little more than a shredded whisper. "Please, don't, please," Terra sobbed, shaking her head violently, her burned skin cracking and bleeding with every movement. I can't. I can't do this, please." The creature drifted closer, its smoky tendrils brushing against Terra's blistered face, leaving streaks of black slime that burned coldly into her flesh. "Lesson 3, it whispered, its multitude of mouths curling into jagged, mocking grins. "Sacrifice is survival." The bell tolled again, louder this time, vibrating the entire chamber. Candles flickered violently, casting flickering shadows of writhing bodies across the blood-smeared walls. Janelle began to sob, tears mingling with blood as they dripped from her burned chin onto the stone floor. "Please, please just kill me, Terra, don't let it take me, don't let it." Terra pressed the scalpel's blade to her own throat, sobbing so violently her chest convulsed. "Take me instead, please, take me." The creature's clawed hand shot out, grasping her wrist with crushing force. Its cold touch burned through her blistered skin to the bone, sending shockwaves of agony crackling up her arm until her vision darkened at the edges. "You cannot offer yourself," it whispered, its countless voices vibrating her bones. "You must choose. Lesson plan incomplete. Detention never ends." It lifted her effortlessly to her feet, her burned legs trembling beneath her weight. Shadows slithered across the chamber floor, coiling around Janelle's ankles and chest, tightening until she let out a strangled, gurgling gasp. "Choose, Terra." The scalpel trembled in her blood-slicked grip. Her mind fractured under the creature's crushing presence, flickering with memories she could no longer tell apart from nightmare, Alyssa screaming behind the locked door, Mr. Halpern's burned face grinning through flames, Max's charred corpse twitching with invading shadows. Jonah's eyes bursting as tendrils burrowed into his skull. Janelle's swollen eyes fluttered open, glazed with tears and agony. "Please, do it, end it, don't let it, take me," the bell tolled again, shattering one of the rusted overhead pipes. Water poured down in a cold torrent, mingling with the blood and mold on the stone floor. Shadows danced wildly across the walls, illuminating the writhing sigils with strobing pulses. Terra screamed, raising the scalpel high above her head, her burned muscles trembling violently. "Please forgive me," she sobbed. She plunged the blade down. Janelle gasped sharply as the rusted scalpel punched through her blistered throat, blood spraying hot and metallic across Terra's face. Her body convulsed once, twice, before going limp, her lifeless head slumping forward against her bound arms. Blood pooled rapidly beneath her knees, mingling with water and slime. Terra fell back onto the slick stone floor, her screams dissolving into choking sobs as she stared at Janelle's corpse. The creature remained silent for a long moment, watching her with its countless violet glowing eyes. Finally, it spoke. Lesson 3. Completed. The bell tolled once, vibrating the shadows into silent stillness. The candles flickered out, plunging the chamber into suffocating darkness. Then, light bloomed from within the creature's chest cavity. The shadows parted, revealing a glowing white void filled with flickering silhouettes of writhing bodies and screaming faces. Its clawed hand extended towards Tara once more. Extra credit, teacher's pet. She trembled violently, unable to speak, her sanity bleeding out like the blood that dripped from her burned fingertips. The creature leaned down, lowering its swirling mass of eyes to hers. Its layered voices pressed into her skull like nails driven through bone. You have passed all lessons. Now, become the teacher. Shadows exploded from its chest cavity, flooding over Tara's trembling body. They wrapped around her burned limbs, forcing themselves through her blistered skin, crawling up her throat, burrowing into her eyes and ears. Agony unlike anything she had ever known tore through her flesh and mind, shredding her humanity thread by thread. Her mouth opened in a silent scream as her vision dissolved into swirling violet shadows filled with countless eyes and mouths. She felt her bones lengthen, her flesh blacken and crack, her muscles twist into unnatural angles. Her mind shattered and reformed, filling with alien knowledge that vibrated with the entity's ancient hunger. In the darkness of her dissolving soul, the creature whispered, "Welcome, teacher. Class is in session." The bell tolled once more, echoing through her reborn consciousness as her scream became laughter, a chorus of hundreds of voices rising in triumphant unison. The tolling bell faded into silence, but its echo remained, vibrating through Tara's newly transformed bones. Darkness surrounded her, thick and suffocating, but she no longer feared it. She was the darkness now. The shadows slithered across her burned skin like loyal pets, coiling around her elongated limbs and clawed fingers. She rose to her full height, feeling her spine stretch with a series of wet pops as her bones reshaped into unnatural angles. Her eyes, no longer human, opened wide, revealing countless flickering pupils swirling within violet sclerae. Her mouth split open impossibly wide, revealing rows of blackened teeth tipped with tiny flickering shadows that whispered in hungry unison. Voices echoed within her mind, hundreds of voices layered over one another, vibrating with knowledge and agony. The students. The teachers. The staff. Every soul consumed by Greyson High now whispered through her consciousness, their knowledge merging into hers, forming a chorus of suffering and revelation. She felt the entity's presence within her ribcage, coiled around her heart like an ancient serpent. Its voice whispered from within, "You are ready, Tara. It is time for the faculty meeting." The darkness dissolved around her, reforming into the burned halls of Greyson High. Flames flickered dimly along the blackened ceiling, illuminating warped lockers and collapsed ceiling beams. The smell of burned hair, rotting flesh, and mold thickened the air, filling her lungs with its familiar rancid comfort. She walked slowly down the east wing corridor, her clawed feet clicking softly against cracked tiles. Shadows parted before her, whispering praises in forgotten languages as she passed. At the end of the hall stood the faculty room. Its door was warped and melted, the brass plaque reading, "Staff only," blackened beyond recognition. Tara reached out with her elongated, clawed hand and pressed it to the door. Shadows crawled from her fingertips, slithering into the cracks and keyhole, forcing the lock to turn with a loud, metallic clack. The door swung open. Inside, the room was lined with burned tables and melted chairs fused into grotesque sculptures. Mold bloomed across the ceiling tiles in thick, black-veined patches. At the far end sat a long conference table, warped from heat but still standing. Around it sat the faculty. Or what remained of them. Mr. Halpern sat at the head, his burned lab coat fused to his skeletal torso, his eyeless sockets weeping thick black ichor that dripped steadily onto the table. Mrs. Wright sat beside him, her melted jaw hanging open, revealing charred teeth fused to scorched gums. The janitor, Mr. Fields, knelt at the far end, his body twisted into a grotesque arch by the burned mop handle impaled through his chest. Their heads turned towards Tara as she entered, their melted faces twisting into mocking, welcoming smiles. "Welcome, Miss Holloway," Mr. Halpern rasped, his voice bubbling through the black ichor spilling from his throat. "You're just in time for the meeting." Tara stepped forward, shadows coiling around her legs and clawed feet, whispering praises of her ascension. She felt her lips curl into a wide, unnatural grin as her voices spoke in unison with the faculty. "Class is in session." Mrs. Wright's melted jaw clacked wetly as she croaked, "Today's agenda, new student intakes, disciplinary measures, and final preparations for the upcoming graduation ceremony." The janitor gurgled approval, black blood bubbling from his melted throat as he rocked back and forth, the mop handle creaking within his chest cavity. Tara tilted her elongated head, countless eyes blinking across her shadowed face as she spoke with layered voices vibrating the burned walls. "How many new students this week?" Mr. Halpern's skeletal fingers tapped the scorched tabletop rhythmically. 3 missing teens from Weaver Hill. 2 local meth users who overdosed in the West Wing bathrooms. And another alumni returning to visit their childhood memories tomorrow night. A ripple of pleasure vibrated through Tara's shadowy form. Her hundreds of eyes closed briefly, savoring the knowledge flowing from their agony to hers. Each new student meant more pain, more guilt, more knowledge. The curriculum continued, feeding the entity nestled within her chest. Mrs. Wright's burned fingers twitched as she rasped, "Disciplinary measures, Miss Holloway." Tara smiled wider, her blackened teeth splitting her burned cheeks into gory tears. Shadows slithered from her chest cavity, forming long tendrils tipped with flickering mouths whispering promises of agony. "Detention," she crooned. "Remedial lessons. Sacrifices. The usual." Mr. Halpern nodded approvingly, ichor dripping steadily from his empty sockets. "Excellent. And for graduation, your preparations?" Tara lowered her head, shadows pooling around her clawed feet as her voices spoke with one vibrating chorus. "They will learn. They will scream. They will understand." The bell tolled once, vibrating the faculty room's scorched walls, rattling burned ceiling tiles down onto their melted table. The toll carried through every decayed hallway and abandoned classroom of Greyson High, echoing through the rotting building like a triumphant war drum. Tara's shadows writhed hungrily as she rose to her full, impossible height, her countless eyes blazing with violet light. She felt the entity within her chest purr in satisfaction, its whispers filling her mind with their endless lesson plans. "Class is in session forever," she whispered, her layered voices echoing through the ruined school as the bell tolled again, welcoming new students into their eternal curriculum. The bell tolled again, vibrating through Greyson High's rotting halls like the rumble of an ancient beast awakening in its tomb. Shadows pulsed in rhythm with each metallic peal, slithering across scorched linoleum and peeling cinderblock walls. Tara moved silently through the east wing, her elongated shadow stretching before her like a grasping claw. Her clawed feet clicked against the cracked tiles with each step, echoing off the blackened lockers that lined the hall. Her countless violet glowing eyes blinked in unison, scanning every flickering shadow for signs of her new students. Behind her trailed 2 writhing tendrils of smoke, each tipped with flickering mouths whispering lessons in languages forgotten by living minds. Their hissing syllables filled the silent halls with vibrating dread. She paused at the entrance to the west stairwell, inhaling deeply through her slitted, burned nostrils. The scent hit her immediately. Sweat, fear, stale cigarette smoke, and the coppery tang of adrenaline-spiked blood. "They're here," she whispered, her layered voices echoing from floor to ceiling. She descended the warped metal stairs, her clawed fingers dragging along the rusted railings, sending up showers of brown flakes. As she reached the landing, her violet eyes flickered, revealing the first new student. A teenage boy, no older than 17, crouched in the corner beneath a flickering emergency light. His hoodie was torn and stained with dirt and blood, and his shaking hands clutched a rusted crowbar. Tears streaked his soot-stained cheeks as he pressed himself deeper into the shadows, praying they might consume him before she did. Tara smiled, splitting her burned lips into jagged gory tears. Her shadows coiled hungrily around her clawed feet, vibrating with anticipation. "Welcome to Greyson High, Jason," she crooned, her chorus of voices vibrating the metal stairwell. "You're late for your first day." Jason let out a strangled sob, raising the crowbar with trembling arms. "Get away from me," he screamed, his voice cracking with terror. "Get away." Tara tilted her elongated head, countless eyes blinking across her shadowed face as her shadows spread across the stairwell, blotting out the emergency light. "Defiance," she purred. "An admirable trait in a student. We will break it first." She drifted forward, her shadows surging around him like an ocean of darkness. Jason screamed, swinging the crowbar wildly, but it passed harmlessly through her smoky tendrils. A flickering mouth lunged forward, sinking needle-sharp teeth into his wrist. He shrieked as the crowbar clattered to the floor, his hand convulsing in agony. Another shadow mouth latched onto his ankle, tearing through denim and skin in one savage bite. Blood sprayed across the mold-choked concrete as he fell to his knees, sobbing in pain and terror. Tara leaned down, her smoky face inches from his tear-streaked cheeks. Her countless eyes blinked rapidly, each pupil flickering with tiny screaming faces trapped within. "Lesson 1, she whispered, her layered voices vibrating through his bones. "Pain is knowledge." She plunged one clawed hand into his chest. The burned flesh parted easily beneath her fingers, revealing ribs and pulsing pink lung tissue. Jason's scream rose to an inhuman pitch as her claws curled around his heart, squeezing gently until his vision flickered with dark spots. "Lesson 2, she hissed, her shadows wrapping around his trembling body. "Knowledge is sacrifice." She ripped his heart free with a wet, tearing sound. Blood sprayed in a hot arc across her burned torso as Jason collapsed forward onto the cracked concrete, his glazed eyes staring sightlessly into the flickering shadows. She held the pulsing organ in her clawed hand for a moment, feeling the final vibrations of life fade beneath her grip. Then she raised it to her flickering mouths. Dozens of needle-like teeth tore into the flesh, consuming it in seconds until only dripping black ichor remained on her burned fingers. She turned, her countless eyes scanning the darkened hall beyond the stairwell. Another scent drifted towards her now, faint lavender perfume mixed with the acrid stench of fear sweat. She moved forward, her clawed feet clicking across the cracked linoleum as her shadows flowed with her like a living river of darkness. At the far end of the hall, beneath a burned exit sign, crouched a girl of 16 with streaked black hair and mascara running in jagged rivers down her pale cheeks. She held her phone in trembling hands, its cracked screen illuminating her tear-streaked face as she whispered frantically into it. "Mom, please, please pick up, please pick up." Tara's shadows surged forward, slamming into the girl's body with crushing force. Her phone flew from her hand, clattering across the tiles until its flickering light went out, plunging the hall into suffocating darkness. The girl screamed as shadows coiled around her throat, lifting her effortlessly into the air. Her feet kicked weakly, shoes squeaking against burned floor tiles. Tara drifted closer, her shadows parting to reveal her burned, elongated face and countless flickering eyes. The girl's terrified gaze locked onto her violet pupils, widening with silent horror. "Welcome, Emma," Tara purred, her layered voices vibrating the burned lockers until metal creaked and groaned. "Your first lesson begins now." The bell tolled again, echoing through every rotting hallway and decayed classroom of Greyson High. The sound rattled dust and mold spores from cracked ceilings, drifting down like funereal snow around Tara's monstrous form. She raised one clawed hand to Emma's trembling face, brushing her burned cheek with surprising gentleness. "Class is in session forever," she whispered, her shadows tightening around Emma's throat until her scream dissolved into wet, choking silence. The bell's toll faded into an oppressive silence, vibrating through the decayed halls of Greyson High like a dying heartbeat. Dust drifted from cracked ceiling tiles in slow, graceful spirals, illuminated by the sickly flicker of malfunctioning emergency lights. The shadows pulsed with each dying echo, breathing with a life of their own. Tara drifted down the east wing corridor, her clawed feet leaving smears of black ichor across the scorched linoleum. Her countless violet eyes blinked asynchronously, scanning the darkness with cold, predatory intelligence. Behind her trailed her two smoky tendrils, their flickering mouths whispering in overlapping layers of forgotten languages. As she moved, charred lockers rattled and groaned, their warped metal doors vibrating with the echoes of her presence. Flickering glyphs etched into their rusted surfaces pulsed faintly with dim violet light, each symbol writhing and reshaping itself in time with her thoughts. She paused at the intersection of the east and south wings, inhaling deeply through slitted nostrils. The smell of sweat, blood, and urine saturated the burned air. Her shadows curled eagerly around her clawed feet, vibrating with anticipation. "They're hiding," she whispered, her layered voices echoing through the empty halls. "Attendance must be taken." She drifted forward, her elongated limbs brushing against scorched walls as her shadows surged ahead like searching hounds. Each flickering mouth whispered promises of agony and revelation, filling the silent halls with vibrating dread. She reached classroom 212, its melted door hanging askew, revealing a darkness deeper than the shadows outside. Her countless eyes blinked rapidly as she stepped inside. Two students huddled beneath a warped teacher's desk. Their faces were pale and streaked with soot, eyes wide with tear-glossed terror. The boy clutched a broken chair leg like a club, his burned knuckles white around the splintered wood. The girl pressed both hands to her mouth, muffling her sobs as tears dripped onto the blood-stained tiles. Tara's shadow mouths hissed eagerly as she crouched low, folding her elongated limbs until her face hovered inches from theirs. Her burned lips split into a wide, jagged smile, revealing rows of blackened teeth tipped with flickering shadows. "Attendance check," she crooned, her layered voices vibrating the desks and walls until flakes of scorched paint drifted down around them like black snow. The boy swung the chair leg with a desperate scream, but it passed harmlessly through her shadows. One smoky tendril lunged forward, its flickering mouth sinking needle teeth into his forearm. He howled in pain as blood sprayed across the scorched linoleum. The girl sobbed, rocking back and forth, her burned shoulders shaking violently. "Please, please don't, please." Tara tilted her elongated head, shadows curling from her shoulders like coiling serpents. "Names," she whispered. The boy gasped, tears streaking soot across his cheeks. "Ryan. Ryan Tate, please. I don't want to die." "And you?" The girl hiccuped through her sobs. Daisy. Daisy Moore, please, please." Tara closed her eyes briefly, her countless pupils flickering beneath translucent violet lids. Their names imprinted into her mind, burning themselves into her eternal roster. Ryan. Daisy. She opened her eyes, leaning closer until her burned nose nearly brushed Daisy's tear-streaked cheek. Her shadows writhed hungrily around them, flickering mouths snapping in silent eagerness. Welcome to Greyson High. She reached forward, brushing her clawed fingers across Daisy's cheek with surprising tenderness. The girl sobbed harder, fresh tears dripping onto Tara's burned hand. Lesson 1, she whispered, her layered voices overlapping in vibrating harmony. Pain is knowledge. She plunged her clawed fingers into Daisy's abdomen. The girl's scream tore through the silent classroom, echoing down the empty halls as her burned flesh split beneath Tara's claws. Blood sprayed across the underside of the warped teacher's desk, mixing with old soot stains. Ryan screamed in horror, clutching his broken chair leg until splinters tore into his palms. Tara twisted her claws within Daisy's stomach, feeling her organs squirm and rupture beneath her grip. The girl's body convulsed violently, her scream dissolving into wet, choking gasps. Tara withdrew her blood-slicked claws, watching with cold curiosity as Daisy slumped forward, lifeless, her head thudding softly against the blood-spattered floor. She turned her countless eyes to Ryan, who trembled so violently the chair leg clattered from his grip. Lesson 2, she purred, shadows slithering forward to coil around his arms and legs. Knowledge is sacrifice. She plunged her claws into his chest, ribs cracking beneath the force of her strike. He screamed as her shadowy fingers curled around his heart, squeezing until blood sprayed from his mouth in thick, bubbling streams. His scream faded to a ragged wheeze as his body twitched weakly. Tara's shadows lifted him effortlessly, his feet dangling inches above the burned floor tiles. She raised him to eye level, her countless pupils staring into his wide, dying gaze. Lesson 3, she whispered, her layered voices vibrating through his fading consciousness. Sacrifice is survival. She ripped his heart free in one smooth motion. Blood sprayed across her burned chest and shadows as his body convulsed, twitching spasmodically before going limp. She tossed his corpse aside, letting it thud wetly onto Daisy's lifeless form. She raised his pulsing heart to her flickering mouths. Needle-like teeth tore into the organ, consuming it in seconds until only dripping black ichor remained. The bell tolled again, vibrating through the classroom until scorched ceiling tiles cracked and collapsed around her. Shadows pulsed with each peal, whispering praises in forgotten tongues. Tara rose to her full height, her elongated limbs cracking as burned joints shifted back into place. Her shadows coiled hungrily around her feet, their flickering mouths whispering eagerly. Attendance recorded, she purred, her layered voices echoing through the darkened halls. Class is in session forever. The bell's final toll faded into a vibrating silence, settling over Greyson High like an oppressive fog. Shadows coiled languidly across scorched linoleum floors, whispering among themselves in forgotten tongues as they slithered through collapsed ceiling beams and burned lockers. Tara stood silently in the faculty room, her elongated frame towering over the warped conference table. Her countless violet glowing eyes blinked asynchronously, scanning the room's melted furnishings with cold calculation. Shadows writhed eagerly around her clawed feet, their flickering mouths snapping softly as they whispered praises and suggestions. Before her lay the lesson plan ledger, a massive tome bound in burned, flayed skin, its warped pages inked with black ichor. Sigils of eyes within eyes, mouths within mouths, and labyrinthine glyphs crawled across each page, shifting subtly whenever she tried to focus on them directly. She reached forward with one clawed hand, her burned fingers cracking as they curled around a quill formed from charred bone and dripping shadows. She dipped its sharpened tip into a pool of writhing black ichor and began to write. Lesson revisions. Her layered voices vibrated softly through the silent room as she spoke each word aloud, imprinting it into the ledger's pages and binding it within Greyson High's eternal curriculum. Lesson 1, Pain is Knowledge. Revisions, duration extended. Begin partial dissections while students remain conscious to observe anatomical truths. The sigils along the margins pulsed approvingly, flickering with dim violet light. Lesson 2, Knowledge is Sacrifice. Revisions, introduce inter-student sacrifices to encourage pure accountability and communal guilt. The shadows around her pulsed eagerly, flickering mouths whispering agreement in overlapping echoes. Lesson 3, Sacrifice is Survival. Revisions. Implement teacher-led demonstrations of organ removal to instill the primacy of obedience. She paused, her countless eyes blinking slowly as a flicker of old humanity trembled deep within her reborn consciousness. Images rippled across her mind, Alyssa screaming behind the locked lab door, Janelle sobbing as Tara's scalpel plunged into her throat, Max convulsing beneath the creature's shadows. A faint, broken sob rose from her burned throat, but it dissolved into the vibrating chorus of voices within her chest. Continue, the entity whispered from within her ribcage, its ancient voice vibrating her bones. The curriculum must expand. Our dominion must grow beyond these walls. She raised her gaze, staring at the burned faculty gathered around the table. Mr. Halperin's skeletal form slumped in his melted chair, his eyeless sockets leaking thick black ichor that pooled on the scorched wood beneath him. Mrs. Wright's melted jaw twitched as she croaked wetly, "Graduation preparations, Miss Holloway." Tara's burned lip split into a wide, jagged smile, revealing rows of blackened teeth tipped with flickering shadows. "Revisions are underway," she whispered, her layered voices vibrating the warped walls and ceiling until burned paint flakes drifted down like black snow. She flipped to a new page in the ledger, dipping her quill into the ichor once more. Graduation revisions. The shadows around her surged upward, coiling along the ceiling and walls like writhing black serpents, whispering eagerly in vibrating harmony. Implement external student recruitment. Extend Greyson High's influence beyond its grounds. Target alumni, their children, and their communities. Introduce satellite lesson plans to create new feeder schools for the curriculum. The glyphs along the ledger's margins pulsed violently with approval, flickering with violet light that illuminated the burned faculty's melted, twisted faces in rhythmic pulses. Begin construction of new annex, the nursery wing. Early childhood indoctrination to ensure lifelong devotion to the curriculum. The shadows moaned in ecstasy, vibrating the warped metal ceiling until rust flakes rained down onto the ledger's slick pages. Mr. Halperin's skeletal fingers twitched against the tabletop, tapping out a silent rhythm of approval. Tara closed her countless eyes, feeling the entity's ancient satisfaction pulsing through her veins like molten iron. Its whispers coiled around her reborn consciousness, pressing into every fragmented memory and dissolving the last flickers of her old humanity. "Excellent, teacher," it crooned, its voice vibrating through her bones. "Your lessons will spread like rot. Knowledge will consume them all." She opened her eyes, staring down at the lesson plan ledger with cold, calculating hunger. "Class is in session forever," she whispered, her layered voices echoing through the silent faculty room. The bell tolled once, vibrating the entire school with its ancient, triumphant resonance. And somewhere beyond Greyson High's burned walls, in silent suburban streets and moonlit fields, shadows stirred eagerly, awaiting their first lessons. The bell tolled, vibrating through Greyson High's rotting foundations like a seismic pulse. Dust drifted down from cracked ceiling beams, mingling with the swirling shadows coiling across scorched floors. Tara stood in the old auditorium, her elongated frame towering before the collapsed stage. Rows of burned chairs faced her, their melted plastic warped into grotesque, screaming shapes. Shadows flickered among them, whispering praises in forgotten tongues, their flickering mouths snapping softly in anticipation. At her feet knelt the new students. They trembled in silent terror, 10 of them, their bodies burned and blistered from initiation lessons. Their tear-streaked faces reflected the flickering violet light emanating from Tara's countless eyes. Behind them, burned faculty members stood silently, skeletal forms draped in melted suits and scorched dresses, their eyeless sockets glowing faintly with cold approval. Tara raised her clawed hands, shadows rising with them like living veils. Her layered voices vibrated the auditorium's sagging walls. "Welcome to your graduation ceremony, students." The shadows moaned eagerly, their flickering mouths vibrating the burned chairs until fractured plastic splintered and cracked to the floor. Tara stepped forward, her clawed feet leaving black ichor smears across the warped stage. Her countless eyes blinked slowly as she surveyed the trembling students. One girl, no older than 16, sobbed uncontrollably, her burned fingers clutching the melted remains of a backpack. Tara drifted closer, shadows swirling around her feet as she extended one clawed hand to brush the girl's soot-streaked cheek. "Do you know why you're here, Amelia?" The girl sobbed harder, shaking her head violently. Please let me go. I just want to go home." Tara tilted her elongated head, her burned lips curling into a jagged grin that split her cheeks into bleeding tears. "Knowledge is home, child. Pain is family. Sacrifice is purpose." She turned away from Amelia, her shadows slithering eagerly across the burned floor towards the other students. Their flickering mouths whispered lessons in vibrating harmony. "You have learned your lessons well. But only through graduation can knowledge become eternal." She raised both clawed hands. The shadows surged upward, coiling along the auditorium walls, forming flickering glyphs that burned violet against scorched brick. Each symbol shifted and twisted, eyes opening within their labyrinthine forms, mouth stretching wide in silent, screaming praise. The burned faculty began to chant, their melted jaws creaking open and shut as black ichor dripped steadily onto the warped stage. Their voices were ragged whispers layered atop one another, vibrating the rotting ceiling beams overhead. Graduation, graduation, sacrifice, salvation. Tara felt the entity within her chest coil tighter, its whispers vibrating through her bones with triumphant hunger. She stepped to the center of the stage, raising her clawed hands above her burned head. Shadows swirled eagerly around her, flickering mouths snapping in time with the faculty's chanting. "Today, you join us forever," she crooned, her layered voices echoing from floor to ceiling. "Today, your knowledge becomes immortal." She gestured to the faculty. Mr. Halperin's skeletal form lurched forward, dragging with him a massive rusted basin carved from melted locker doors and fused metal fragments. Its surface was slick with congealed blood and black ichor, steaming faintly in the cold burned air. He placed it before Tara with trembling skeletal fingers, his eyeless sockets leaking thick black tears down his charred cheeks. "The sacrificial basin is prepared, Miss Holloway," he rasped, voice bubbling through ichor-choked lungs. Tara smiled wider, shadows writhing with delight behind her. "Excellent." She gestured to the first student, a boy of 17, his face streaked with soot and tears, his burned chest heaving with ragged sobs. 2 shadow tendrils slithered forward, wrapping around his arms, lifting him effortlessly into the air. He screamed as they carried him over the basin, suspending him upside down, his burned face inches from the congealed blood below. Tara extended one clawed finger, her burned skin cracking with the motion. She placed the tip against his trembling forehead. Lesson 1, Pain is knowledge. She pressed her claw down. His skull cracked with a wet pop, blood spraying down into the basin in thick, bubbling streams. His screams dissolved into gurgles as his body convulsed, shadows tightening around him like iron restraints. The faculty chanted louder, their voices vibrating the auditorium's burned walls until fractured ceiling tiles rained down like blackened snow. Tara turned to the next student, a girl with burned arms twisted protectively around her stomach. Tears streamed down her soot-streaked face as she whispered prayers to gods who had long since abandoned this place. Lesson 2, Knowledge is Sacrifice. She plunged her clawed hand into the girl's chest. The girl screamed, blood spraying across Tara's burned torso as her ribs cracked beneath the force. Shadows surged forward, wrapping around her organs, pulling them free one by one, dropping them into the steaming basin below. The chanting reached a fever pitch. Shadows flickered along the auditorium walls, forming thousands of flickering eyes that opened and closed in rhythmic harmony. Finally, Tara turned to Amelia, who sobbed uncontrollably, her burned hands pressed over her ears as she rocked back and forth on blistered knees. Tara crouched before her, shadows parting to reveal her countless violet-glowing eyes. She raised one clawed hand to brush Amelia's tear-streaked cheek again. Lesson 3, Sacrifice is Survival. Amelia shook her head violently, screaming, "No. No. I don't want to die." Tara's burned lips split into a wide, jagged smile. Death is knowledge denied. Today, you ascend. She plunged her claws into Amelia's chest, lifting her effortlessly as blood sprayed in hot, metallic torrents. Shadows wrapped around Amelia's twitching body, pulling her up towards the cracked auditorium ceiling. The bell tolled once. Shadows exploded outward, flooding the auditorium with flickering blackness. Tara rose to her full height, her countless eyes blazing violet as the entity within her chest roared in triumphant hunger. The burned faculty fell silent, their melted jaws hanging slack as they watched shadows consume the graduating students, pulling their twitching bodies into the burned walls until only silence remained. Tara raised her clawed hands, shadows writhing eagerly behind her. "Graduation is complete," she whispered, her layered voices vibrating the silent auditorium. "Class is in session forever." The bell's final toll faded into silence, leaving behind an echo that vibrated through Greyson High's scorched foundations like a dying heartbeat. Shadows settled across the auditorium, curling along burned walls and twisted chairs, whispering softly to one another in sibilant, forgotten tongues. Tara stood upon the warped stage, her elongated frame casting a towering silhouette across the flickering glyphs carved into the back wall. Her countless violet-glowing eyes blinked asynchronously as she surveyed the empty rows where her new graduates had once knelt. The shadows coiled around her clawed feet, their flickering mouths whispering praises and suggestions in vibrating harmony. Behind her, the burned faculty gathered in silent reverence. Mr. Halperin's skeletal form slumped in his melted chair, ichor dripping steadily from his eyeless sockets. Mrs. Wright's melted jaw creaked open and shut rhythmically as if reciting silent prayers. The janitor, Mr. Fields, knelt near the stage steps, his burned hands scrubbing invisible stains from cracked tiles as black ichor leaked from the mop handle impaled through his chest. Tara raised one clawed hand, shadows surging upward to wrap around her fingers like living smoke. Her layered voices vibrated through the auditorium as she spoke. "Summer school begins tonight." The burned faculty stirred at her words, their melted heads turning towards her in silent anticipation. Shadows flickered across their charred faces, illuminating pulsing glyphs branded into their burned skin. Mr. Halperin's skeletal fingers twitched against his melted desk. "New lessons, Miss Holloway," he rasped, voice bubbling through ichor-clogged lungs. Tara tilted her elongated head, burned lips splitting into a wide, jagged grin. "New students. New rituals. The curriculum expands." She stepped forward to the front of the stage, shadows slithering behind her in eager tendrils. She extended one clawed hand towards the burned auditorium doors. As her fingers curled into a beckoning gesture, the doors groaned open, revealing flickering darkness beyond. Outside, the world waited. She could feel it in her mind, the entity's awareness stretching outward from Greyson High's rotting walls, slithering through the cracked asphalt of Weaver Hill Road, coiling beneath suburban lawns and empty playgrounds, slipping between the walls of darkened homes where children slept fitfully. Attendance must increase, she whispered, her layered voices overlapping in vibrating chorus. Summer school will not be confined to these halls. She turned back to the faculty, countless eyes blinking in unison. Draft the rosters. Alumni. Their children. Their children's friends. Begin induction rituals at dusk. Attendance is mandatory. Mrs. Wright's melted jaw cracked wider, ichor dribbling down her burned throat as she croaked, and the curriculum, Miss Holloway. Tara lowered her clawed hands, shadows coiling eagerly at her sides. Lesson 1, Pain is knowledge. Lesson 2, Knowledge is sacrifice. Lesson 3, Sacrifice is survival. But new lessons must be added. She raised her hands again, shadows rising with them to dance along the scorched ceiling beams. Lesson 4, Obedience is truth. Lesson 5, Truth is hunger. Lesson 6, Hunger is eternal. The burned faculty shivered with grotesque delight, their melted bodies creaking as they nodded in trembling unison. Shadows pulsed around them, whispering praises that vibrated the auditorium's decayed walls. The bell tolled once. Tara stepped down from the stage, her clawed feet cracking scorched tiles with each silent step. She moved down the center aisle, shadows flickering around her in writhing anticipation. As she passed, burned chairs bent towards her, their twisted plastic arms raised in reverence. She reached the open auditorium doors and paused, inhaling deeply. The night air drifted in, thick with the scent of distant lilac bushes, wet asphalt, and the faint metallic tang of fear. Her countless eyes blinked slowly as she whispered. Summer school is now in session. She stepped into the darkness beyond Greyson High, shadows coiling around her elongated form like a living shroud. The burned faculty followed silently, their melted limbs dragging across scorched floors as they moved into the halls to prepare. Outside, in quiet cul-de-sacs and silent homes, shadows slithered through bedroom windows and beneath locked front doors. The entity's whispers spread like rot through sleeping minds, planting dreams of burned halls and flickering glyphs, of clawed teachers and eternal lessons. And somewhere far beyond Greyson Hill, a child woke screaming, her voice dissolving into the night as shadows coiled around her bed, whispering. Attendance is mandatory. Class is in session forever. The bell tolled once more, vibrating not only through Greyson High's rotting walls but rippling outward in inaudible waves across Weaver Hill, the nearby towns, and into the silent reaches of the sleeping countryside. Windows rattled faintly miles away, unnoticed by families who slumbered, dreaming of burned hallways and flickering glyphs they could not comprehend. Tara stood at the edge of the football field, the rusted goalposts towering behind her like skeletal sentinels. Shadows coiled around her elongated form, flickering mouths whispering praises in 1,000 forgotten tongues. Her countless violet glowing eyes blinked slowly, surveying the landscape before her. The entity pulsed within her chest, wrapped around her ribs like an ancient serpent. Its whispers filled her mind, vibrating through every splintered memory. Tonight, teacher, the curriculum becomes eternal. The burned faculty gathered behind her. Mr. Halperin's skeletal form slumped forward, ichor dripping steadily from his eyeless sockets onto the ash-choked turf. Mrs. Wright's melted jaw creaked open and shut in silent prayer, black ichor bubbling across her scorched chest. The janitor, Mr. Fields, dragged his mop handle impaled through his burned torso, leaving a trail of black sludge in the dying grass. Before them, the summer school students knelt in the dirt. Hundreds of them. Their burned bodies trembled beneath the cold moonlight, blistered arms twisted protectively around themselves as tears streaked soot-stained cheeks. Some whispered fragmented prayers, others sobbed quietly, broken beyond words. Tara raised her clawed hands, shadows surging upward like black flames. Her layered voices vibrated across the silent field, carrying on the faint breeze that rustled through rusted bleachers and burned chain-link fences. Welcome to your final lesson, students. The shadows pulsed eagerly, flickering mouths snapping open and shut in rhythmic anticipation. Lesson 1, Pain is Knowledge. She gestured, and the burned faculty stepped forward. Mr. Halperin raised a rusted metal rod crackling with flickering shadows. He plunged it into the chest of a kneeling boy, who screamed as his ribcage split open with a wet cracking sound. Shadows surged from the rod into his exposed lungs, writhing within him until his scream dissolved into wet, bubbling gasps. Lesson 2, Knowledge is Sacrifice. Mrs. Wright dragged a teenage girl forward, her burned fingers digging into blistered flesh. She forced the girl to kneel before Tara, whose countless eyes blinked in vibrating unison. Tara plunged her clawed hand into the girl's abdomen, twisting until her organ squirmed against her burned fingers. Blood sprayed across the burned grass as the girl convulsed violently, shadows slithering eagerly into her ruptured body. Lesson 3, Sacrifice is Survival. She withdrew her hand and gestured to Mr. Fields. The janitor swung his rusted mop handle in a slow arc, black ichor trailing behind it as he moved to the next student. Tara turned her gaze skyward. Above her, the clouds churned in silent chaos, flickering with pulses of violet light that illuminated the land in brief, strobing flashes. She saw shapes moving within those clouds, massive, writhing silhouettes crowned with branching horns of shadow and flickering with countless eyes. The entity's voice vibrated through her bones, echoing from the clouds above and the shadows below. Lesson 4, Obedience is Truth. Tara raised both clawed hands. Shadows surged outward in all directions, slithering across the field, slipping beneath cracked roads and into silent homes. They coiled around sleeping families, flickering mouths whispering vibrating truths into their dreaming minds. Lesson 5, Truth is Hunger. She felt it then. The entity's full consciousness unfurling within her, revealing truths so vast her mind fractured and reformed around them. She saw Greyson High as it truly was, not a building, but a temple, constructed atop an ancient pit that pulsed with cosmic hunger. Its lessons were not human knowledge but the devouring truths of an older universe. Lesson 6, Hunger is Eternal. Her countless eyes blinked open in unison, each pupil flickering with screaming faces trapped within. She saw them all, every student, every teacher, every janitor, every alumni absorbed by Greyson's curriculum across decades, centuries, eons. Their pain and guilt sustained the entity's dominion, and through them, it learned and consumed more. Tara raised her clawed hands to the sky, shadows erupting from her chest cavity like a black sun. The burned faculty fell to their knees behind her, melted faces lifted in silent praise. The students screamed in vibrating unison as shadows surged through their bodies, consuming their pain, their knowledge, their souls. The clouds above split open, revealing a yawning void filled with writhing shadows and pulsing glyphs. From its depths, eyes opened, massive, lidless, burning with cold violet light. They stared down at Tara, their flickering pupils writhing like coiling serpents. The entity's voice spoke from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating the land and sky. You have fulfilled your lessons, teacher. The curriculum is now eternal. Class is in session forever. Tara threw back her burned head and screamed, her voice overlapping with thousands of others trapped within her shadows. Her scream became laughter, vibrating the night as the shadows surged higher, tearing through the clouds to merge with the pulsing void above. The bell tolled once, louder than it had ever tolled before. Its echo rippled through Greyson High, through Weaver Hill, through every silent town beyond. Windows shattered. Dogs howled. Children woke screaming as shadows flickered across their ceilings. And in that final vibrating echo, Tara heard the entity's final lesson. Knowledge is consumption. Consumption is devotion. Devotion is eternity. The clouds closed, swallowing the pulsing void and its countless eyes. Darkness settled across Greyson High, silent except for the flickering whispers of shadows slithering through burned halls and flickering glyphs that pulsed with cold violet light. Tara stood alone on the football field, shadows coiling around her like a living throne. Her countless eyes blinked slowly as she whispered with her layered voices. Class is in session forever.